7:35. So why don't we go ahead and get started. I'm James Levine. I'm serving as the chair of tonight's meeting. First order of business is approval of the April 20th commission meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? Are there any edits or proposed changes to the minutes? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes as submitted. I hear a motion. Is there a second? Second. Any objection? Motion passes. So thanks everyone for being here tonight. I know it's a rainy night and it's a late start. We appreciate everyone being here and the continued civic involvement in this matter. I realize that we do not have our name cards up here tonight as we do when we're in Borough Hall. So if I could ask commission members, starting on my far left, to introduce themselves.
I'm John McCallum.
David Virgil. Rex Bryant.
Doug Heinsberger. Chris DeBrone.
Nancy Templeton.
John Jones. And at the far end is Borough Solicitor Bob Scott. So we're here tonight to consider the conditional use request for 110 Park Avenue and 102, 104 Park Avenue. Mr. Petrosa, will you be presenting this evening?
Yes, sir.
At your convenience.
Good evening. My name is Don Petrosa, and I'm representing the applicants who are, I'll say their name once and then just refer to them as the applicants. 110 Park Avenue, owner, LLC, and 112 Park Avenue, LP. The owners or equitable owners of 110
I think there's probably... Could you pull it a little closer?
Okay. The owners of, or equitable owners of 110-112 Park Avenue and 102-104 Park Avenue, which I'll refer to as the applicant. I provided the borough with copies of the deeds and the agreement of sale to provide evidence of standing of the applicants. The property is located in the TC zoning district, the Town Center zoning district. The Town Center zoning district was created in November of 2013 and replaced the former BA business apartment with the zoning district. As you probably are aware, the applicant proposes to demolish the existing buildings to make way for redevelopment of the property with a mixed-use building pursuant to the regulations of the TC district. We filed a conditional use application to begin the process, requiring people to ultimately demolish the existing buildings on the property. Section 1256.06 of the zoning ordinance provides that no structure located within the Town Center zoning district shall be demolished unless and until a demolition permit shall have been approved by Borough Council in accordance with the conditional use application procedures outlined in Section 1264.11, Chapter 1256, and the Building Code. Thus, the ordinance provides that conditional use approval is required to demolish any buildings in the Town Center district. Procedurally, an application for conditional use approval is required to be reviewed by the Borough Planning Commission, which makes a recommendation to Borough Council. Then the actual conditional use hearing is held before Borough Council, which makes the decision on the application. Obviously, the proceeding before the Planning Commission is not a hearing, it's a review for a recommendation by the Planning Commission to Borough Council. Before any of these buildings could actually be demolished, a number of things would also have to happen. In addition to the conditional use approval, Section 1256.06C provides that no permit for demolition shall be approved until the applicant has received a zoning permit for a new building confirming that the proposed new building will be in compliance with borough codes. The ordinance provides at Section 1256.07 that the application for the zoning permit is submitted to and reviewed by the zoning officer who makes the decision on the application for the zoning permit. And the zoning officer issued his approval of our zoning permit on April 11th, 2022 after several revisions of the drawings. We submitted an initial set of drawings, kept submitting revised drawings, and ultimately it was approved. In addition to all of the foregoing, prior to the receipt of the demolition permit, the applicant will be required to provide documentation to the borough of the financial capability to begin construction of the new building within 60 days of demolition of the old buildings and to provide a timeline for construction. An application for demolition is also required to obtain the review and approval of the building code official for the demolition. I believe we may have submitted our application, but the borough code official understandably felt it was a little premature until we received the conditional use, but we just wanted to get that process in. Accordingly, what we're seeking this evening is the Planning Commission's recommendation of approval of the conditional use application to permit the demolition of the existing buildings on the property. This is the only issue before the Planning Commission this evening. At a later date, we will be returning to the Planning Commission with respect to our application for lot consolidation, which is sometimes referred to as reverse subdivision and land development. The two buildings in the front of the property at 110 Park Avenue and I think it's 102 Park Avenue are both included in the borough's 2001 Historic Resource Survey. The ordinance provides that in order to demolish a building which is included in the Historic Resources Survey, it must be demonstrated either that, number one, the building is structurally unsound and cannot be stabilized, etc., which is not relevant to this proceeding, or two, demolition will not have a substantial negative effect on the character of the town center. So that's the principal issue, section 1256.06. We submit that the demolition of these buildings will not have a substantial negative effect on the character of the town center. In that regard, we submit that this relates to the buildings themselves and not to the identities of any individual tenants or occupants of the buildings. Recently, it's been announced that the commercial tenants are relocating to another location, but it's still the issue of whether or not the demolition of the buildings would have a substantial negative effect on the character of the town center. Now, conditional use approval is not required for the proposed new development, just for the demolitions of the building on the property. There are no specific standards for the two rear buildings, only the general conditional use standards found in section 1264.11, which frankly are largely somewhat vague, non-specific, and subjective. And those general standards are difficult to apply to demolition of buildings. I submit that the reason for this is that demolition is not really what you typically think of as a use. It's like saying the construction of a building is a use. And the general standards really apply to an ongoing use. Normally, conditional uses are actual ongoing uses of a property. For example, a school is permitted in a residential district by conditional use or special exception. Having said that, we believe the proposed demolition is consistent with the general conditional use standards in the ordinance, in that the ordinance allows demolition in the town center district, even of historic structures, which constitutes a determination by the Borough Council that demolition in the town center district is appropriate. Chapter 1256 of the zoning ordinance contemplates demolition and redevelopment in the town center district, which was the prior VA zoning district, to, among other things, encourage economic viability and to encourage a walkable and accessible town center. After much study, professional and local advice, and expense, the elected officials realized that the center of town needed a shot in the arm, a boost, and they attempted to give it that in 2013 by ordinance number 1056, which established chapter 1256, the town center district. Currently, and at the time that ordinance number 1056 was enacted on November 12, 2013, almost 8.5 years ago, there are and were no vacant parcels of land. Borough Council realized that demolition was required in order to revitalize the downtown area. A conditional use is a form of permitted use. We provided the required notice to the abutting property owners and furnished proof of notice to the borough. We also, and we submitted an affidavit of service, which Mr. Webb acknowledged. We also provided a notice of demolition request to the Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission and gave proof of that to the borough. That is another ordinance requirement that we notify the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, I think at least 10 days before demolition is proposed, and we send it back, I think, in November. So it's been quite a while. I'd like to begin the presentation by asking the three principals in the applicant to just briefly introduce themselves and tell you who they are, and just a little bit about each one of them.
I'm Don Nelson. I've lived in Swarthmore for almost 40 years. I'm married a Swarthmore native, almost. I think she moved here when she was 1. We met in college. I have 3 daughters, one of whom is here tonight. She, with her husband, they have 3 children, all in Swarthmore, and I have another daughter who lives in Swarthmore with her husband and 2 children. My 3rd daughter escaped to San Francisco, but she's zooming in to this meeting tonight. I've been involved in almost everything in Swarthmore, the swim club board, the co-op board, the Wallingford Swarthmore School District Board, and Borough Council. And with Beth Gross, who many of you know, I owned Swarthmore for 30 years. I love Swarthmore, and I love the town center, so that's my motive for proposing this building. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Bill Cummey III. I grew up here in Swarthmore. Currently live in Devon with my wife and 2 daughters. I am president of W.S. Cummey Construction. Our office is just across the border in Springfield, where I share an office with my father. He'll introduce himself in a second. And I'm one of the partners of the 110 Park applicant. So that would make me Bill Cummey Jr. And my wife and I have moved here in 1975, right after we got married, and have been here ever since. Been involved in pretty much every, I won't bore you with the list, but involved in pretty much every organization in town. Hope to spend the next 47 years here as well, or we'll see how that goes, but that's our goal. And to reiterate what Don said, we're really here because we really believe, not just in the past of this community, which we've loved, but we really believe that what we have in mind is really vital to the future of Swarthmore. And we hope that you'll get a sense of our passion tonight, and ultimately it'll be borne out that it is true. I want to start by saying that I really do appreciate, thanking the Planning Commission, because they're all volunteers. This is the 2nd night this month, and I certainly, we appreciate that you made a special consideration to have this hearing tonight, and we do thank you for your time, and obviously for your dedication to the community. I also want to just really start by saying that we had, when we started this process just about a year ago, our goal was to try and have the realization of what the town center zoning district was established to encourage and enable. And it was, as Don Petrosa mentioned, it was 8.5 years ago, but that was really just the end of a process that began, frankly, in the late 90s, when both Don and I were involved in borough government in a revitalization effort, and there's been a whole bunch of efforts since. There have been literally countless hours spent by countless number of really dedicated community members in looking at ways to keep our town center vital. It's really, we have a wonderful housing stock. We all live here. We love the community, hugely. But there have been challenges in the town center, frankly, for a long time. And this district was established for that. And our goal from the very beginning has been to make sure that the building that we proposed conformed entirely with that ordinance. Our goal was not to come and ask for any variances. It turned out to be a little more complicated than that. We thought we had done that in our December application. We found out that the borough had some different interpretations of some particular clauses in the ordinance. So we went back, and as Don mentioned, we made a couple revisions, met with Bill Webb to show him what we had in mind, to try and make sure that we could get, that we had a building that really was what was envisioned by this community when they established this district back in 2013. And we were really gratified to see that the result of that was that we did receive the zoning approval just a couple of weeks ago. I also want to say that at the outset that we really have profound respect for the whole restoration and historic preservation process. Our company's been involved with it for 40 years. It's a lot of what we do. Back in the 80s, when some of you may remember, the train station was really in a serious state of disrepair. We entered into a 20-year lease with SEPTA and restored the building and used it as our offices for 18 years. And then when we were finished, we facilitated the college taking over the lease for the next 20 years. And it's been obviously, it's a beautiful part of the town. So we didn't take lightly, it wasn't our goal to come in here and level the lot. When we purchased the 110 building, we sort of assumed that was really, not a serious contributor to the town. It's in the town center district, but it's not really part of the town center. It sets back from the road, 45 feet from the curb. It's never been retail. It was residence converted to offices many years ago. So it was, as our belief, that would be clearly relatively uncontroversial. Obviously, in this town, nothing is uncontroversial, but we thought that the demolition and replacement of 110 and the building behind it, which you'll see in a few minutes, which was actually built in the 70s, would be relatively uncontroversial. Wasn't quite the same with 102, quite honestly. We had respect for it too. There are 3 sides of that building that are, not very attractive and not in, terrific repair. But the facade is attractive, and in particular the Indiana limestone on the first floor. And you'll hear in a few minutes some of the efforts that we've made to both pay homage to that building in the new building that we are proposing, but also to deconstruct the limestone facade, and there's a 4-inch veneer, and to reuse that on the alleyway, which is part of our plans to upgrade the experience of the pedestrian alleyway that goes back to Warehouse 3 and on over to Rutgers. But so the very first week, right after we had signed an agreement of sale, I met our architect and our structural engineer there at 102 to take a look at the possibility of could it be incorporated into the larger building, and found that it was not impossible, don't get me wrong, but it was really not impractical. It was not feasible. The foundations were not nearly in the shape that we thought they might be. To incorporate into a larger building would be extremely difficult, even incorporating the facade, which there's a lot of controversy over whether that's a good idea or not, but regardless, it would have been difficult to do that. There's nothing about the building that's accessible. To reuse it would actually involve getting variances from the town center because it doesn't actually apply. So in the end, we concluded that that building, as well as 110 and the garage in the back and 112, would have to be demolished in order to facilitate the best building that we could build there. I think if you've been following some of the dialogue in the last several months, you've probably heard a lot about this historic resource survey. And you're going to hear in a few minutes from a woman who's really been synonymous with the preservation of the Swarthmore's history for as long as I can remember. And she can she was part of the survey. She can help. She's going to help give you some information about what it is and what it isn't. And you'll see a little later that when you look at the town center district, nearly every building in the town center district is also on the historic resource list. So that if every building, there's been some people taking the point that the fact that this building is on the list means it can't be demolished. But if that's in fact the case, then what we have now is what we have in perpetuity. That's, clearly the people who spent all those hours crafting that ordinance were doing it in vain if none of these buildings could ever be demolished. So I hope you'll get a better sense of what the historic resource is. If a building is on that historic resource list, which 102 and 110 are, then there's a hurdle where we have to establish, which is really the question tonight that we have to come to grips with, and we hope to demonstrate to you, is would the demolition of those buildings have a substantial negative effect on the character of the town center? And we would submit that certainly buildings that would. We're not here to say, gee, every building in town is eligible to be demolished. Absolutely not. We just think that it's clear that these 2 buildings their demolition would not substantially impact in any negative way the character of the town.
Really what I'd like to do first is grab this. Okay. Just very simply kind of lay out what we're asking for today. So we talked about 4 buildings that we're asking to be conditional use to be demolished. 2 of those buildings have no additional hurdle, and 2 of those buildings are on the resource list, so they have that additional hurdle that you've heard about that we need to prove they will not have a substantial negative impact on the character of the town center. So real quick, just a highlighted version of the existing survey that we've laid out there. 102, 104 is the building on the street, and 112 Park. Those are, 110 Park. Those are the 2 buildings that are listed in the historic resource list. Those are the ones you'll all be mostly familiar with. There's a garage structure in the back and a 112 Park in the back. So just we're going to show some quick images. I know everybody is familiar with these buildings, but figured we'd run through them all. And then I'll provide some context and how they fit into the town center and why we feel like this is the appropriate thing to do. So 102, 104, as my father mentioned, we do feel that it is an attractive facade. But really when we looked at incorporating this building into the project, we said the functionality of the existing building is a real challenge. The retail is not accessible, making it accessible would be extraordinarily difficult. The existing facade on the alley, which we know is technically it's an easement alley, but it's used as public space, it's used as a cut through to Rutgers. It would be very difficult to preserve that, or it'd be very difficult to beautify that as it exists currently. So those were some of the factors that went into that decision there, and we talked about some of the ideas we have with respect to reconstructing components of it to try to keep the character, even though we cannot keep the building. Second, 110 Park, and I think we would argue that this really doesn't engage in a town center kind of way right now. It was never designed to do that. It's not a mixed-use building like many of the other buildings in the town center district. The streetscape is not in great shape. It's narrow sidewalk. There's not a lot of ways for it to engage with the streetscape because of the grade change, etc. And I think most people would argue it doesn't really impact the town center. In fact, the town center zoning district extends eastward 2 more parcels from 110 Park, and arguably to encourage a further development of the town center, to be more walkable, to make this part of the town center more walkable. We're now in the new community center that's across the street from that, and really the extension of the town center to make this more vibrant, we think is a great benefit of the proposed project. Here's another shot of the facade of 110. And then the record the 2 buildings in the back. This is 112 Park. This was built in, I think, the 70s. So late enough that it has not been cataloged on any of the historic resource lists, and therefore it doesn't have the same hurdle as the 2 buildings in the front of the property. And lastly, the garage structure behind 102, 104, separate building that does need conditional use to be demolished, but again, doesn't have the additional hurdle of the substantial negative impact. So I know everyone's pretty familiar with those buildings, but wanted to run through them quickly for everyone's benefit. Really to look at how the town center zoning district, to put this project and this application for demolition in context. What we have here is the green area is the town center zoning district as it exists. Every shaded area in red that you see is a building that is on the historic resource list that you'll hear more about tonight, and everyone has heard about in some capacity, I'm sure, who's engaged in the long process of this project. The building, the light purple in the sort of planned north edge here, and also mostly north, was I'm not sure if it's 1 or 2 buildings. 2 buildings that were on the historic resource list, they were demolished. They were demolished prior to the establishment of the town center zoning district, so under a different process. But nonetheless, there is precedent for buildings that are on that list getting demolished. The blue area, as we all know, is Borough Hall. And then the purple area is the 2 buildings that we're proposing demolition of right now. So just to give this a little bit of context, if you look at this overall zoning area, we're talking about 4 structures that we're looking to demolish that have a building footprint of roughly 6,500 square feet. 102 and 104 and 110, which require the additional hurdle or listed buildings, have a footprint of roughly 6,500 square feet, and 112 in the garage roughly 2,100 square feet. The entirety of the town center zoning district is just around, it's around 10 acres, 435,000 square feet. So both 102 and 110 each represent basically less than 1% of the footprint of the town center zoning district. So just one piece of context there. You could argue that's not an appropriate way of characterizing a town. It's certainly, I guess, a quantifiable way. Another way to think about it is if you look at the street scheme, right? We're basically talking about a 40-foot facade for 102. It's a 40-foot facade that actually fronts the sidewalk on Park Avenue. That's less than 1% of the street frontage in the town center zoning district. So just from a sort of quantifiable perspective, I think that puts in some context the demolition of these two structures with respect to a substantial negative impact on the character of the town center. The last thing I'll say, and I'll hand it over to someone who has much more expertise with respect to this historic resource survey and the reasons behind it. If you look at the town center zoning district, it has 32 parcels of land in it. 3 of those are government owned, and only 5 do not have a resource listed in the town center zoning district. So just for context, the development of this district, the drawing of the lines of it, the encouragement of redevelopment, 6+ pages of code we needed to meet with respect to everything from percentage of building openings, building heights to setbacks, etc. In order to receive the zoning permit we did receive. Our contention really is that the conditional use application with the demolition of these buildings is consistent with the intent, is consistent with the goal, both on paper and in spirit of the ordinance. And as we talked about, that was really our guiding principle from the beginning. So that was just wanted to provide as context, and I'll hear from a couple other presenters on our team that have a little more expertise in these areas to put some meat on the bone, some of those things we just put out there. So thank you.
My name is Susanna Markon, and I reside in Swarthmore. I work as an archivist at Swarthmore College, and I was one of the founders of the Swarthmore Historical Society. I chair the committee of the Historical Society, the field studies for the Historic Resource Survey, working with Delaware County Planning. I later served on the Borough Task Force on Historic Preservation, and Pat O'Donnell and I compiled and wrote the Images of America booklet on Swarthmore Borough that was published in 2009. I'd be happy to go into more detail about the resources of the Historical Society and the process used in the site survey, which began as a borough centennial project. Swarthmore's inventory includes over 350 buildings, roughly dating from 1724 to 1940. Because there has been a misunderstanding about the purpose and regulatory power of the Historic Resource Survey, I'd like to clarify that it does not claim historic protection for the structures that are included. Rather, it serves as a baseline survey with the intention of collecting pertinent information that can be used in planning, as well as to expand knowledge and interest in local history. It's a project of the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, administered locally through the County Planning Department. The Commission's website, if you go to it, explains the goals and process. The survey is open to anyone who wants to contribute information. The form to submit information is available on the website. Currently, the goal of the Commission is to add documentation for buildings up to 1960. The Historic Research Survey of Swarthmore Borough was submitted to the Commission's Bureau for Historic Preservation and is part of the Commission's, this is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's, database as a public document. A survey provides an important first step for individuals or municipalities to pursue preservation planning, but it does not supersede local ordinances, and it has no legal authority. I'd like to emphasize that the Historic Resource Survey is ongoing and not intended to interfere with local planning and carefully considered community revitalization. In the absence of historic preservation programs certified by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Borough of Swarthmore refers to inclusion in the Historic Resources Survey for the purpose of planning in Swarthmore Town Center. I want to note that within the survey published by the Delaware County Planning Department are some specific recommendations for the borough to consider in planning. Swarthmore College campus, some residential subdivisions were deemed worthy of consideration for National Register, as well as specific sites, including Michael's Corner, Swarthmore Train Station, the Post Office, and the Shire Building. Note that there is no recommendation to pursue nomination of the business district as a whole for National Register. As used in Swarthmore's Town Center zoning ordinance, historic value is a general term that does not in itself endow protection, but rather promotes review. In that sense, the Historic Resource Survey, I think, has accomplished exactly what was intended, encouraging transparency and civil conversation and debate. Every old building has a history, but that in itself does not make it worthy of special preservation. Regarding the specific buildings under discussion, the survey for 110 Park Avenue, which is on the periphery of the district, includes only an exterior description and approximate date, and 112 is not included at all. The mixed-use building at 102-104 Park Avenue includes a description of the facade, but does not indicate historic significance or recommend the building for any special protection. Obviously, character is a subjective term. I don't think that 102 and 104 or 110, 112 are essential to the character of the business district, nor that their removal would have a substantial negative effect, particularly since they are not centrally located and not contiguous to other businesses. As a successor to the existing mixed-use building, the proposed project would use the combined properties more effectively for retail and residential use. I expect that local businesses and the community as a whole would benefit. And then finally, personally, I think it's the sort of revitalization that was intended for the town center. Thank you.
I am currently a professor of planning in the Geography and Planning Department at Westchester University, and I teach courses in land use planning. I have a master's in planning and I have a doctorate in urban and regional planning. Previously, I worked as a professional land use planner in the region, working mostly in Pennsylvania, but also New Jersey. I'm an AICP certified planner. And I also have a professional planning credential to practice planning in New Jersey. Much of the work that I do and that I've done professionally relates to urban and town center revitalization and land use planning in general. I've also had experience developing zoning and applying zoning ordinances to site planning and design and development projects. To prepare for my presentation tonight, I read the relevant sections of the Swarthmore Borough zoning ordinance. I've reviewed the plans for the proposed redevelopment, and I've also reviewed a number of community planning documents, including the 2006 multi-municipal comprehensive plan that Swarthmore adopted along with Nether Providence Township and Rose Valley and Rutledge boroughs. I also reviewed the 1999 revitalization plan, which is referenced in the 2006 comprehensive plan, and I've also reviewed the 2030 vision plan. I also had an opportunity to speak one-on-one with Sharon Mester and Beth Murray of the Vision 2030 Task Force. Overall, I have to say at the start, I believe that demolition will not have a substantial negative impact on the town center. And moreover, the proposed redevelopment is consistent with a number of the planning goals stated in various public planning documents, and is also consistent with good town center planning principles that are promoted by the broader planning community, both within the region and nationally. So this is a conditional, so we're reviewing the conditional uses tonight. And just to remind everybody, as we know, demolition of any building in the district is a conditional use, and therefore has to meet the standards in 1264.11. But demolition of a building that is considered of historic value, which 110 and 112 are, have to meet the additional condition as stated in 1256.06. So I'm going to review both of those sections. But again, let me just say, repeating a little bit of what Don Petrosa said, demolition is allowed in the ordinance and can be done while meeting each of the conditional use criteria. And demolition will not have a substantial negative effect on the character of the town center. To implement the planning goals stated in the comprehensive plan and revitalization plans, demolition is necessary. The strict design guidelines that are included in the zoning ordinance will ensure that any new building is compatible with the existing character of the town center. Okay, well I want to start with section 1256.06, which states that in order for a building of historic value to be demolished, one of two conditions has to be demonstrated. Either that the building is structurally unsound, which is not relevant here, or the demolition of the building will not have a substantial negative effect on the character of the town center. So it kind of begs the question, what's community character? According to the American Planning Association, community character refers to the distinct identity of a place. Sometimes referred to as sense of place, it's the physical and social characteristics that the residents and the visitors of the town value and closely associate with that town. Well, I think it's something that we all experience on an intuitive level. It can be hard to describe and it can be hard to characterize. Elements that generally contribute to community character include the patterns of the buildings and streets, the nature of the blocks, the streetscape, trees and vegetation, open space, and how the buildings relate to the street. These things all come together to create a unique physical form that supports a place where you can conveniently and comfortably walk from location to location, where there are public spaces and sidewalks where people can meet and gather. Communities continuously evolve. In managing change, it's important to consider those characteristics that contribute to the community character and to protect them to the greatest extent possible. Swarthmore has built those safeguards into the zoning ordinance to protect the elements of community character that they've identified and that they value the most. So how would you characterize the character of the town center of Swarthmore? Well, section 1256.04 of the zoning ordinance, which are the design standards, describe the character of the town center as having a traditional community character and pedestrian-oriented nature. It's important to consider the entirety. I believe it's important to consider the entirety of the town center. Okay, let me get the zoning map up. Take a look at the zoning map. But I think it's important to really consider the entirety of the town center in describing its character and considering any negative impact from demolition. The town center district, which you can see, the orange district in the middle, it's a unique district in the borough. Due to its location and its function, it's anchored by a train station. It radiates out along Park, Myers, Dartmouth, and Rutgers. It's a compact and concentrated downtown that contains a mix of retail, residential, governmental, and commercial uses. It contains a variety of different types of buildings. It stretches over to the 101 building at 101 South Chester Road, which is a 4-story, 51-foot tall building. The town center district is flanked on two sides by apartment districts. The Swarthmore and Greylock apartment buildings, which are to the south, are both 5 stories. The Dartmouth apartments to the, I guess, the northeast are 3 stories. The town center has a special identity, which is developed over time. It's walkable, pedestrian-oriented, transit-oriented, mixed-use, supported by an attractive streetscape, with buildings that relate to the streetscape. All of this comes together to create a human-scale environment at the street level. And as stated in the comprehensive plan and reaffirmed in the legislative intent of the zoning, careful planning and regulation is needed to ensure that new construction is done in a manner consistent with the purpose of the district and the neighborhood context. The town center ordinance does this with a combination of the dimensional standards, but also the use of design guidelines and very extensive design guidelines. Following those design guidelines, new development can be designed to fit the context of the community, build on its positive qualities, and reinforce the unique sense of identity in place. The demolition in and of itself will not have a substantial negative effect because, as Suzanne has already presented, the buildings in question, the buildings on the property, while they're considered of historic value, they're not considered distinctive historic assets, not a vital element of the local cultural heritage. And just to reiterate, they are considered of historic value because they're listed on the Historic Resources Survey, which is a very comprehensive inventory, not an indication of historic significance. And again, as has already been mentioned, many of the buildings in the town center are listed on the survey. Okay. So again, I'll just finish up this section by saying, I believe the demolition of these structures will have no substantial negative effect on the character of the district. The design guidelines that are in place will ensure that new development will have a complementary character. Okay, I want to shift over to the general conditional use standards, 1264.11, and this applies to the demolition of any building. I'll go through these quickly, but I do want to spend a little bit of time just on the first one. So Section A says one of the standards, the conditional use is consistent with the Borough Comprehensive Plan and the spirit, purpose, intent, and provisions of the zoning ordinance. I already mentioned the comprehensive plan that's in place is the 2006 multi-municipal comprehensive plan. And then the zoning then is premised on the comprehensive plan. I don't believe there's anything in the comprehensive plan that speaks negatively to demolition on its own. The comprehensive plan has a number of planning goals, policies, physical project recommendations for the town center that anticipate redevelopment. And let me just mention a couple of them. In the land use section of the comprehensive plan, there's a description of the different zoning districts. Now, the plan was written in 2006, before the new town center zoning was adopted. So in 2006, the district was called the Business Apartment District. The plan states that the purpose of that district is to encourage and control what the words from the plan, reasonable intensification of the existing commercial district with additional trade and residential uses to strengthen its vitality, to provide convenient shopping services for the citizenry, anticipating change. One of the specific recommendations in the district states that area and bulk regulations should be revised to reflect the urban, they use the word urban, and mixed-use character of the district. So recognizing it's a district that is suitable for higher intensity development. And then in looking at the economic characteristics, the comprehensive plan references the 1999 Swarthmore Town Center revitalization strategy, which was adopted after extensive community and stakeholder engagement. The revitalization strategy included several recommendations to improve the viability and expand the district, including promoting additional development. So they anticipated additional development, which would require demolition. So the comprehensive plan then recommends continued implementation of the town center revitalization strategy. And I'll also just mention that one of the specific recommendations is to expand opportunities for residents to age in place in the borough. And then following along with that same conditional use standard in regard to the spirit, purpose, intent, and provisions of the zoning ordinance. As a conditional use, demolition is not inconsistent with the spirit, purpose, intent provisions of the zoning ordinance. Let me just highlight a couple of things related to the stated intentions of the town center zoning district. The first one, subsection A, states encourage economic viability with the use of flexible standards that maintain Swarthmore's unique identity. C says promote the construction of new structures, again, which would anticipate demolition. Standard D or subsection D says ensure that new buildings, again, anticipating new development, are sympathetic with and enhance the surrounding streetscape. And there are others. But again, my larger point, the zoning legislation anticipates new development, which will require demolition, while clearly speaking to the need to ensure compatibility of new construction within the town center. Okay, so the second standard for the conditional use is that the property is suitable for the conditional use, and such use may be regulated by appropriate conditions and safeguards. The buildings, I believe, can be safely demolished. I wouldn't anticipate any extraordinary noise or other impact. And ultimately, the proposed new development will be consistent with the zoning requirements. Section C states standard C states the conditional use serves the best interests of the borough and the community and does not injure the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. I don't believe the demolition of the building in and of itself would threaten the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. And moreover, demolition will create an opportunity for redevelopment that might better serve the interests of the borough by bringing additional vitality to the town center. Standard D states that conditional use does not cause inefficiencies in the maintenance of public services, such as sewer, water, police and fire protection, transportation, and public schools. No public services really would be required as a result of the demolition, so these things won't be affected. Okay, and then standard E states the conditional use is not incompatible with the surrounding area and character and type of development and does not injure property values in the neighborhood. Now, I talked about character in the last section, but I'll just reiterate some of the points there. Demolition, I believe that demolition for redevelopment will satisfy these requirements. Again, as previously stated, demolition itself is not incompatible with the character of the surrounding area. Loss of these resources, all of the resources, will not create incompatibilities with the existing character of the town center district. The design guidelines ensure that new development will have a complementary character. And then also redevelopment of these properties is expected to have a positive influence on property values overall. Okay, and then standard F, the conditional use does not cause overcrowding of the land and congestion of the circulation systems. Well, in some ways, this standard is also not relevant. The demolition of itself would create a vacant lot and not create a concern around overcrowding or congestion. And then finally, last standard, standard G, no activity shall be conducted that would cause odors, unreasonable noise, smoke, vibrations, pollution, or electromagnetic interference beyond the property line. Again, in some ways, this is not entirely relevant. No, there's no unreasonable impact that would result from the demolition. There might be some noise impacts while it's happening, but they would be temporary. So that concludes my presentation. I think our next speaker, Jamie Martin from Bernard.
Hello, my name is Jamie Martin, and I'm with Bernard, the architect that is working on the new development. I'll keep my comments brief because most of what I would want to say is echoing what's already been said.
I think you'll find a receptive audience.
So what we're looking to do is extend and strengthen the streetscape that really embraces the town center's ideals of walkability and inviting storefronts along these properties. The existing properties at 110 is sitting back from the edge of the street at 40 plus feet with a narrowed sidewalk. It's not addressing that town center need or desire. 102, although it sits at the sidewalk, it has no accessible entrances. So, without getting too much into the new construction, what we're looking to do is to strengthen that corridor and extend it, which is currently broken by the alleyway between 100 and 102. And we think that's a great opportunity to create and enhance that pedestrian access. And we could work that into possibly repurposing some of the facade at 102 to strengthen that again. This could become a really great pedestrian-friendly space if we could extend the town center facades further to the border there. But the ultimate goal is to be consistent with the planning goals of Swarthmore and the town center and to enrich that entire pedestrian experience. Without getting into more details of it.
Thank you, Jamie and Susanna. I'll make this very brief. I just want to summarize that we really, first of all, thank you for your patience. We just wanted to, there was a lot to address. We wanted to make sure we try to address every question you might have. I just want to close with saying that we get preservation is hugely important. It's what makes Swarthmore great, what makes living in the Philadelphia area great. If you spend time in places that don't have the history we have, like Phoenix or Southern California, it doesn't have the character that we have. But preservation doesn't mean that everything before a date certain, in the case of the historic resources, 1960, is here forever. So we think that not only have we spent a lot of time talking about that the demolition of these buildings that will enable the actually ultimate goal of creating what was envisioned in the town center will have a substantial positive impact on the town center, and we're sort of anxious to get there. Without the conditional use, it can't happen. Makes the ordinance sort of pointless, and frankly makes any development in the foreseeable future difficult to envision. Thank you.
We may want to sum up at the end to make a public comment. That's the end of our presentation.
Thank you. I have a clarification question for Mr. Cumbie III. You identified that the square footage of these buildings was 6,500 square feet, and then compared it to 10 acres of town center zoning. Just so that we have an apples-to-apples comparison, can you tell us what the lot size is in comparison to the overall acreage of town center rather than the square footage?
Sure, the lot size is roughly 25,000 square feet of the combined parcels that would be redevelopment, so that's about 6%.
About 6%.
Correct.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Petroza, a threshold question for you before we move on. I believe you initially expressed that we were only here to discuss the demolition of the buildings, not to consider the building that was going to be built in their place, correct? Am I recalling your statement?
That is correct.
Okay. Your presenters have given extensive discussions about the building that will replace these buildings if they are demolished. In light of the additional discussion that's been had about those, would you like to revise your prior comments about what should be considered this evening? Or are you going to stay with, we should only be discussing the demolition, in spite of the presentations that have been made on behalf of the applicant?
I think my initial statement was correct. I mean, the issue is the demolition. But one can say demolition for what purpose? So we thought, we didn't get into detail of the building, but we did get into the fact that it's redevelopment pursuant to the ordinance. And that's really all the comments were, that the ordinance standards themselves provide the guidance. We didn't get into a discussion of those standards, except that we're not demolishing it just to leave a big hole. We're demolishing it for the purpose of redevelopment. But you cannot take a permitted use and convert it to a conditional use. You can't have a conditional use unless it's identified as a conditional use or a special exception.
Without considering what that conditional use would be, is you're saying?
Yeah, what I'm saying is you can't make something a conditional use that the ordinance doesn't specifically say is a conditional use. And this ordinance only says, or says only, that the demolition requires the conditional use, not the new building.
I just want to make sure we're clear on the parameters for this evening. Thank you. All right. We will now open the floor. I'm going to open up the public comment first, and then we can after we close public comment, the commission itself will have a discussion. Yeah, please step up to the microphone so everyone can hear you. If you could start off by introducing yourself by name and address.
Can you? My name is Allison Manford. I've been a resident in Swarthmore for over 25 years. I live at 211 College Avenue in Swarthmore. I simply want to address the statements made about the character and historic value of the town center business district. I have here from the Executive Director of Preservation Pennsylvania, who has reviewed the streetscape and buildings in question. I could read the whole thing to you. I will give it to you to put in your record, but I'm going to read one paragraph in particular. Any demolition within a historic downtown community is unfortunate and affects the integrity of the streetscape, issuing a hole in the rhythm of the block, almost like missing teeth. In this case, however, these missing teeth are proposed to be replaced with the construction of a massive 5-story building completely out of scale with the remainder of the district. The building will loom over the smaller scale historic building, possibly creating such a dramatic change in the district that it will be no longer eligible for the National Register. And it goes on about the pedestrian-friendly qualities of the town that we all love. I simply want to say that this proposed demolition cannot be taken into consideration without considering what's going to go in its place, the scale, and the substance of it. I understand that they do not want to say that now, but if we're talking about preservation and historic value, and I'm going to put this in the record, the Executive Director of Preservation of Pennsylvania has reviewed it and found his project to be wanting. Second statement I'd like to make is that there's a member of the commission who has a direct conflict of interest, in my humble opinion, David Virgil, and I just want to note that for the record that he is related to the builder in question of this project. Thank you. How do I submit these to the record?
You can pass it up. I will also just put on the record that the Planning Commission is in receipt of correspondence, including a January 5th, 2022 letter from Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia, a December 14th, 2021 correspondence from Preservation Pennsylvania, and a December 10th, 2021 correspondence from Heritage Commission of Delaware County. We're also in receipt of correspondence dated April 22nd, 2022 from Philip Rosenzweig, who's counsel for Save Our Swarthmore, Shannon Elliott, Martha Perkins, Melanie Rodbark, and Christopher Kenny, notifying the Commission of a pending appeal to the Zoning Hearing Board of the zoning permit that was issued to the applicant. We are also in receipt of a April 25th, 2022 response from the Borough Solicitor, Robert Scott, responding to those with the that the concerns in that letter. Members of the Planning Commission have received and considered those letters in advance of this hearing tonight.
Just like to indicate, we haven't received.
Thank you. Any other public comment, please come to the microphone.
Hi, I'm David Farrell, 407 Yale Avenue. I moved to Swarthmore in '97 before the first talk of the redevelopment plan, and it was a much better town than we have now. There was a full functional grocery store. Everybody stood up at those meetings for the original town plan transition, and people were irate that there were going to be chains in our stores, that we were going to lose the character of our town, our quality of life would go down, that our property values would decline, and it's all true. It all has. And to say that, this is going to be a driver for high economic activity impact for the districts, and the district can handle more economic, high intensity of economic capability is ridiculous. A child can see that all the land is built up around here. There's houses throughout the district on basically any good lot, and people come here to live, to be in houses, to not be in an urbanized existence. It is close to the train station, but people aren't here to live in an urbanized existence. And all the land that we do have is really special. It's a unique biome, it's a tree town USA, and we can barely hold on to the little lands that we have. And when I was a kid and moved here, kids would run through each other's backyards, all through the town. And it was like, it was okay to just go chill out sometimes in yards. And it gets more urbanized here, we've lost the quality of life. And it's always sold as this good new thing that we have to join, it's gonna help us in some way. And it's the new co-op, how has that really helped us? It's more boutique, it's all expensive, it's all frivolous, extravagant stuff, and it keeps pushing the diversity of the town down. We get more and more high-end, more echelon boutique living, and less characters in the town that care more about social function and stuff. The old co-op used to be a general purpose grocery store, and you didn't maybe it wasn't good for some things, but you could get functional stuff there that you needed, if you needed some cleaning supplies for the house, or I don't know, toiletries, or just some basic life stuff where you didn't have to leave, you didn't have to go to the supermarket like the old co-op had. And they put it in this, they sold us this, and we're going to redevelop and put this snazzy new building. And the new building is not really any better. It's less economic on size. There's less a variety of stuff in it. They still don't make any money.
Mr. Farrell, can I ask you to please try to target your comments?
All right, my comments is that, that building, everybody knows that apartment building and some of the other ones are old, and they probably should be replaced. But to think that we're going to I think what's going to happen is the town's going to cave again, and there will be some gaudy shit, pardon my language. There's going to be some gaudy 5-story thing, like it's happened in media and all these places, that ruins the town. We don't need a gaudy thing. It's supposed to be a modest place to live. It doesn't need to be an extravagant, urbanized existence. And I think it's ridiculous to demand that and to try and turn residential, good residential small town living into an urbanized shift, because people come here because they don't want to be in a strictly urban place. And I think it's going to drive property levels down. And I don't want to see it happen to the town again. It's my experience in 25 years. The quality of life has gone down when redevelopment plans happen in the town. It doesn't matter how careful with all the lies that say how it's going to be this way, it's not going to be bad, it's a new building, everybody in the town gets to live it, and it sucks. And I think if we do need to redevelop those buildings, and why do people in the apartments say so, or the old apartment buildings say so? We should just have a modest redevelopment of co-housing, and if it is going to be in the town, it should include co-housing for to mix different age groups, seniors, college students. It shouldn't be one income bracket. I forget what they call it. There should be a like some affordable housing, mixed housing. Some affordable housing, maybe a college teacher, college professors could live there, researchers at different places, traveling Quakers or whatever. You know, it could be like a mixed use thing, possibly with like some senior care. Just more creative ideas, because Swarthmore is like a unique place, and I hate to see it just washed over, brainwashed, and the roads that still don't work right. The town's still confusing when they put the road by the car. You go up to the top of the road, and you can't go the way down. They tore down the village restaurant, they tore down the tea house.
If I could bring it back to the
character of the town over this fallacy of a high intensity. This is going to be more high intensity economic impact driving, and there's no fucking land anywhere for this to happen.
Mr. Farrell, I think we're done. Thank you. I will ask everyone to please keep their comments targeted to the application that we're under consideration this evening. I know that this is a high intensity issue and that emotions run hot with this. It's late and it's going to get later. And we want to hear what everyone has to say, but if we could ask everyone to please try to keep their comments targeted to the particular application that issue here, that would be most appreciated. Sir, please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Tom Schaefer, 430 Rutgers Avenue, and I'm a former member of the Planning Commission and also a professional planner. I would urge the Planning Commission to not approve the demolition permit. I believe that it would have a negative effect on the town center character. It would be roughly doubling the height of a new building, replacing the existing buildings and roughly doubling the height for the new building. And I think that is a negative impact on the town center's character. So I would urge the Planning Commission to not approve the demolition permit. And going beyond that, I believe in the future the Planning Commission and Borough Council must take a look at the zoning ordinance to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Because if it is allowed to happen again, we will have any building in the downtown be demolished and replaced by a 5-story building. And that is something that should not be permitted.
Hello, my name is Bob Small. I live at 305 Rutgers Avenue and have lived there since 1988. And I found that I sometimes express myself best in a poem. So let's see if I get it. I remember Swarthmore, it's called. I remember Swarthmore, all the trees that used to grow, all the stores we used to know. I remember Swarthmore, biking, sitting, standing, walking, stopping in the sidewalk's middle for some unplanned talking. Do you remember Swarthmore as it is now and before, a village, nay, a borough or a town, where people met both town and gown, while people just going around. But this photo of Swarthmore will soon be no more, never more. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
That's why I
Hi, my name is Beth Fitzsimons. I live at 813 Westdale. I used to live at 310 Cornell, and I've been here. I don't know why it seems to matter to everybody, but I've been here for 43 years and raised 3 children here. So, those are my bona fides. My question pertains to this potential substantial negative effect that was discussed, and thank you for all that information. I have a concern about what I see as a substantial negative effect on the character of the town center of this demolition. I know we have to just speak of the demolition, but obviously there would be something coming afterwards. And that is related, the negative effect related to traffic. And this hasn't been clarified for me, the safety of walking in the town. I know we talk about accessibility at the town center, which it is now. I happen to spend a lot of time working at the library, and there's a great deal of crossing back and forth in front of the library by children and older adults and everybody. There's no crosswalk there, so everybody just comes back and forth. My concern is related to traffic in front of this very large building. As near as I've been able to see from any of the photographs or any of the drawings, there's no place for deliveries. There's no place for an Amazon truck. And the Amazon trucks are all over Swarthmore all day. I'm assuming there's going to be multiple residents and they're ordering things. There's no place for UPS. There's no place for grocery deliveries. I don't know where those trucks will be accommodated, but if they're pulling up in front of that building, we're going to have a safety issue with people crossing the street, or indeed people trying to navigate what we've discussed as a narrow little sidewalk. It's going to be nowhere near as narrow as it will be when we've got delivery trucks pulling up onto the sidewalk, as they do now routinely on Chester Road. We also are going to have a significant increase in traffic, which I think will have a substantial negative effect on the character of the town. There's going to be traffic coming and going of people in the building itself. Of course, they're going to want to drive. One's going to assume a couple of cars for every apartment. That's quite a few people. And then we get to parking. We have parking issues already in town when there's any kind of event. I'm not sure where all of the guests of all of the people in this building are going to park. So I've got some questions about accessibility and about safety, and I'd like to have them addressed. I don't know if there's been any kind of traffic study done, has there? Okay.
It's on our website and Alfred Rico.
Okay, well, I'm just assuming that it could be made available in some way to everybody without necessarily going to the website. It's a town issue. So I don't know if the issues that I have just raised have been answered in the traffic study. I'd like somebody just to tell me about them right now. Perhaps you can tell me where all those trucks will be going.
The reason is they're not going.
I think that the best way to do that would probably be to go review it yourself on the borough website. It is listed on the borough website.
Okay.
The traffic, I appreciate your concern about traffic and your statements. This forum is not really the appropriate forum to get into the details of that traffic study. It's been performed. I would say if you have concerns, review it. You can raise them with the developers, raise them with the borough manager.
Okay, my assumption is that if there's a demolition permit given, it becomes rather a moot point because the buildings are gone and we're making way for something. But I appreciate that, and thank you. I'm sorry that it wasn't published in a more accessible form, but it's just a simple question. Can somebody tell me where the trucks are going to go? And if that's a question that cannot be answered, then perhaps this needs to be considered. There might be others who are interested in that information.
Aram Hartan, I live at 312 Austin Avenue. I guess the form...
Repeat your name.
Aram Hartan, E-R-U-N-H-A-R-T-U-N-G. I guess before I make my comment, just to clarify a question about the previous comment, so is the traffic something that was subject to approval and has it been approved?
No.
So what would the next step for that be?
The next step in this process is that there will be an application by the applicants for a land development application approval.
But that could happen after the demolition?
No, the demolition will not take place until all of the ducks are,
okay, perfect.
Thank cannot by statute happen. So this is just preparation to get things out of the way.
Okay, thank you. So my comment relates to the issue of character. I mean, I think obviously character is a subjective thing, but by definition, that means that the character of a community has to be defined by the community. And that means that you, as members of the Planning Commission, who represent us as members of the community, need to take in the general community's opinion about what constitutes the character of the town. It's not about building heights and setbacks and specific architectural styles or this or that parameter. It is about what we as a community believe. I'd like to remind you that over 800 or so people signed the SOS petition expressing concern that not only the demolition of the existing buildings, but that the proposed new building would significantly alter the character of this town in a negative way. And so I'd like to really emphasize that. The other point is that I know we're not supposed to be talking about what's to come, but since the developers also did that, They really are cherry picking parts of both the task force, the 2030 redevelopment plan, and all of these different things to pull out the things that advantage them. There are parts of those plans that they are completely not in line with, such as the 2030 task force presentation, which was given just 3 years ago, I believe, had a suggested price point for new housing of between $250,000 and $450,000. I believe, if I remember the details correctly from the presentation that was in this building several weeks ago, I believe the price point for these new condos is going to be between $600,000 and over $1 million. That in and of itself alters the character of this town. We have all seen gentrification happen. Gentrification happens just like this. Housing prices are going through the roof everywhere, and if we allow this to happen, then Swarthmore will become just another high-end place where no real people can afford to live, and that the rest of us will be priced out by the people who have managed, who've moved here from New York City, where a $600,000 condo seems cheap, and the rest of us whose own houses are not worth that much are going to be priced out of this community.
Al Richardson, 114 Park. I seriously doubt I'll be getting a call, but thank you everybody else. I want to put in a brief plug for 110. I live right next to it. I personally consider that a fine building, and I specifically consider the sidewalk very pedestrian friendly. It's got a nice lawn, and when the prior occupant was maintaining the greenery in front, it was really very special. And the question I believe before you is impact on the character of the town. A lot of people mention that, including the developers. And even though these are sort of on the edge of town center, they are not on the edge of a very important social center of the town, which is the farmers market, the Truckathon, the amphitheater in front of Borough Hall. These buildings really help define that area, and it is very important to say.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mark Turville. I live at 312 Cornell Avenue. I was that's old neighbor. So I just wanted to put on record my opposition to the project. I'm probably not going to say anything original. I wish I'd written a poem like Mr. Small. I thought that was lovely. I thought about singing the Monorail song with the Simpsons. I was just going to say what several others said in a different way about the character of the town since the Westchester professor brought it up. If you put the Mondo condo in town, that becomes the center of the town. That will define the character of Swarthmore. It's just such a massive project. No one's going to talk about Michael's building. That will be what Swarthmore is. So I think that's what. It's the question before the planning commission. We think not at all being useful. That becomes Swarthmore. It's such a massive project. And does that benefit my kids? Does that benefit the future of Swarthmore? Or does that benefit Swarthmore? I think that's the question you need to think about. Because this becomes what town, this becomes the center of town if you put it into place. So that's the point.
Thank you.
Swarthmore long ago at 423 Harvard. I would like to comment on something that's a little bit different. It has to do with the community itself. And almost 50 years that I've been here, I've seen the residents of Swarthmore come together in very coherent moments, very coherent ways, in order to express clearly their opposition to things happening. One of those things was the attempt to develop. It actually happened. Our middle school was taken and became part of the larger district. Some of the people who are the principals here, that's how I got to know them. They fought really hard, and the community didn't want it. We lost. Later with Pico was going to put in high tension lines across the borough, right through here, where there was no need whatsoever for having such a development here. We didn't need the electricity, it was for Springfield's various malls. And I think it's really important that when we fended off that attempt by Pico, there was a very large community turnout and a very clear community feeling in opposition. I think right now there is once again a pretty heavy groundswell of members of the community who are questioning whether this should be done. I think that one of the things that we're talking about, the size of these various buildings being taken down, is relatively small. But in fact, the footprint of that thing that we're replacing is much, much, much greater as the height, of course. I also want to mention that when the England burned, it was a very hard time for a lot of us people who have been here for years to want to eat there. And we was joy in the whole community when we realized that the people who were going to take over the building would rebuild that building just as it happened. And that preservation meant a whole lot and was understood by everyone. So I think that in taking a good look at this, and also if you would go back and reread our former mayor's comments about this, he says basically that it's too big for this particular area, it's too high, the footprint's too big, and there are other areas in the borough or the area that might have been much more accommodated to this type of development. I believe myself that this would be something of a permanent scar, if you would, on the community. And I'm hoping we'll take a look at this and not just see the fact that these small buildings are being demolished, but that the space, not just the space of the buildings themselves, but their entire space will be filled by a new building of much, much, much greater size than all of them put together. Thank you very much.
Boy, I wish I was as articulate as that guy. I have a visual thinking.
If it can be easily uploaded, then great.
Is that something? Oh, okay, I'm checking. Okay, so
I'm sorry, can you state your name and address?
yes, I'm Chris Kennedy. I'm from 321 Park Avenue, and I've lived in Swarthmore since 2005. There are two provisions of the zoning code that I'd like to speak to this evening. Neither concern particulars of the proposed project, which is working its way through the approval process. My comments are focused on the two historic buildings, mature trees, and the landscape that the developer proposes to destroy, and the way in which the proposed development will deprive the community of the benefits that these structures offer. The buildings and landscape that would be lost if the site is scraped, as builders say, are thankfully protected by our zoning code. Section 1264.1 requires that, quote, the conditional use is not incompatible with the surrounding area and character. Section 1256.06 requires demolition of the building will not have a substantial negative effect on the character of the town center, as has been discussed above. As I considered the character of Swarthmore, I looked to Susan Morikawa's helpful book, Swarthmore Borough in the Images of America series. Some images from that book are reproduced on the handout that I passed out and are up on the screen there. You can see that the town center has a rich history of street venues and open space in the photo on the left, which is from 1940. A legacy of this is still visible if you look above the cornice line of the Paulson building. The Paulson building is on the right in the image. You go to the next slide. The fact that you can just see the peak of the old Paulson home enveloped by storefronts is a particularly sad example of what happens when development eats up public space. The fact that even that sad home is dwarfed by the proposed vertical gated community makes it all the worse. At a planning and zoning committee meeting last night, a person in the room observed ruefully that the only public space in our downtown is a parking lot. How did this happen? We let it and are facilitating the destruction of what little is left. 110 Park Avenue and the 25 or so mature trees on that site that would be scraped are, even if on private property, very much part of our public life and the character of our town. They are the last vestige of the historic character of the village and a welcome relief from building to the property line. The Celia building is scaled to our town, and as you've heard and will hear, is a physical repository of our heritage, the struggles of our forebears, and our memories. The conditional use that is sought, the 65-foot tall condo project, is the polar opposite in character of the buildings, landscape, and places that it would destroy. This is the essence of Section 1264.1, which requires that the conditional use is not incompatible with the surrounding area and character. As for the second statutory reference, 1256.06, the phrase, quote, buildings, landscapes, and places, end quote, is the basis for the Park Service's evaluation of historic districts for national listing. And it determined that our village meets the criteria for listing. 110 Park Ave and Celia building are part of that whole, and the generous breathing space around them is the last vestige of our historic green community center. Once they are gone, the paved fishbowl will be complete. The statute is clear. It protects all historic buildings that contribute to the character of the town center. It does not single out the Shire building, or Michael's, or the PNC Bank, or any other property. By allowing this demolition to go forward, the Planning Commission is setting a precedent that will do no less than justifying the bulldozing of our community and any of its historic properties by a developer with money and access to counsel. The loss of the senior Celia building and 110 Park Ave is not just an isolated tragedy. It is no less than the precedent that will allow the destruction of our community. There is no building like this in the town centers of even larger neighboring communities that propose structure. How can we allow this to happen to our community and those who will come after us? I ask you to attach this to the
Chris, your flash drive?
Sorry?
Your flash drive?
Oh, okay, thank you.
Jamie Schindel, 300 Cornell. I had a question regarding one of the facts that was presented.
Sorry, recover. What was your name?
Jamie Schindel, 300 Cornell. I had a question regarding some of the facts the applicant presented regarding the size of the buildings they're demoing and the lot they are going to cover. Do you know the percentage of open space within town center relative to your project? Do you know the percentage of pavement, road, sidewalks in town center?
Because the issue tonight is the demolition of the building. It's not open
I can't
space.
understand a
It's not
6% of the town center for your project without knowing the relative open space of town center or the paved area of town center. Yes, 6% does seem small, but when you don't take into the fact how much of that are trees and grass and the sort, it's hard to compare. I just wanted to know if you could provide that.
We don't have that.
Thank you. Are they allowed to provide additional information to questions that have not been answered? Like an appendix to a meeting?
I mean, we're going to be voting tonight
Okay, that's
on
fine.
the application.
Not a problem, thank you.
I'm sorry?
Public vote right here.
It's a public meeting.
Yes.
Yes, we're voting at this meeting,
Okay.
at the conclusion of comment and more discussion.
And my last comment is, I feel the applicant has failed to prove to us that the two buildings in question are significantly, or not significant to the historic character. So I really appeal to you, based on everything that people in front of me have said, I completely agree. They have failed to prove that they're not significant and shall not be allowed to demolish them. Thank you.
My name is Shannon Elliott. I reside at 523 Cedar Lane in Swarthmore, but I am one of the lucky independent store owners who gets to call the Celia building their home away from home. I want to talk more tonight about the Celia building. I'm hearing these words tonight that you need to use to decide if it's right to demolish, and it's so kind of just seems surreal to me because the things that we're saying will come by taking them down are the things that I get to live and breathe every day by using the space. Vibrancy, character, historic value, positive impact. These are things that have been brought to my life the last 4 years because I get to create something, create a community in the Celia building space. And I'm not the only one. Before me, there was Craftoria, Cricket Way, Shop on Park, Carver's Hair Salon, and of course, Joseph Celia Custom Shoemakers, which was home to the Celia building for 102 years, for 60 years, and the building was built 100 years ago by the Celia family. Celia Poez introduced herself to me about 3 years ago. My shop received a Best of Philly recognition in their annual magazine, and she was reading it at the beach and noticed the address and immediately called me. She called to tell me how excited she was to see that the building her grandfather had built was still in existence, still thriving, still an important part of the Swarthmore community, and she was even more thrilled to see that it was being regionally recognized. I then heard from her again in December when she heard about the first time this conditional use application had come up. And she wrote a letter that she also submitted to the borough and to the Swarthmorean that I will read now. Hello, my grandfather built the Celia building in the early 1920s. He had even imported marble from Italy for the foyer. After a long struggle with the town, he was finally able to build the apartment building with two businesses, one of which was his shoe store. His grandfather also sponsored men from Italy as they came through Ellis Island. He taught them a trade, gave them housing in his own home, and allowed them to become new Americans with jobs. When my father took over, he employed many men from Chester, teaching them a trade and hoping they could then start a business of their own. When my father passed away, a good many of the then Black community came to his wake and services and thanks for this. An honor for sure, and something I will never forget and still moves me to this day. Swarthmore has history. Please do not destroy building after building, taking away the feel of the town. So many small towns are doing this, as tax revenue is apparently the most important thing in the world. Is there not an historical preservational committee? However, and in all fairness, I also do not know the details of the sale and who the current owners are and why they feel the need for this decision. My family currently lives outside of Syracuse, New York. When we were in the area for a family reunion, I took a picture of my son sitting on the front steps of the store. He never met his grandfather, nor did I ever meet mine. I'm grateful that I have this picture. I will always have memories of the wonderful times growing up in such a special town, and how lucky my family was to be part of the Swarthmore community. Seems as if a condo building will take away from the Swarthmore feel. Please remember what the town represents. Please remember what Swarthmore is. A condo building is not part of that representation. I wholeheartedly agree with Elvira. I believe we need to get creative. We need to reuse the resources that we have. It's in our best interest in the long term to not lose these historical resources, or we will be losing an important part of our community. And I will close in just letting you know that Elvira also reached out again today, again pleading to not demolish the building. And I have a copy of her latest letter, including a picture of her son outside of what was then Craftoria for you to review. Thank you.
Would you be so kind to put a picture of Celia holding up for me? Thank you. Thank you. Chris, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. I am Melanie Rodbart. I live at 544 Westminster Avenue since 2013. I'm a design professional that specializes in existing buildings and historic preservation. And I'm raising 2 small children that love to play in downtown Swarthmore. Bill and Don, I want to thank you tonight because although I've been living in Swarthmore for 8 years and I love the character of our town, which is why I moved here, I have never felt more connected to people in our community because of this project. I have met so many amazing people that I would have never met last October when this project was released. And I do want to thank you for that. I had planned to speak in depth about the Historic Resources Survey, but I'm so glad that Susanna already did that, and I will not need to repeat those statements. However, the documents that I have passed out relate to the extra level of documentation relative to the buildings at 102, 104, 110, and 112 Park Avenue. I strongly oppose the demolition of these properties. These buildings were listed as contributing to the Swarthmore Business Historic District, which were determined to be eligible for the National Register of Historic Places in 2002 by the State Historic Preservation Office. I provide those letters to everyone. The borough went to great lengths to solicit experts, local officials, and community members to prepare the Historic Resources Survey and the Multi-Municipal Comprehensive Plan. We have so much documentation of our historic resources here in Swarthmore. It's pretty amazing. What was the point of documenting that history of Swarthmore Borough, conducting an analysis and gathering survey data for the most significant sites in Swarthmore if we are simply going to ignore it? The borough thought it was important enough in 2013 to include the survey findings in our zoning code. Why is the borough now acting like none of this happened? It is time for Swarthmore's officials to do their duty and deny a demolition permit for the proposed project. The demolition of these buildings is irreversible. It will have a substantial negative effect on the character of town center. I would like to highlight the key architectural components of the Celia building located at 102, 104 Park Avenue, as I read a letter that I prepared and sent as a letter to the editor in the Swarthmorian, which was published on March 25th, 2022.
The Celia building is one of Swarthmore's best detailed commercial historic buildings. The style of architecture is classical revival from the early 20th century. It is characterized by a symmetrical arrangement of forms, typically with a smooth or polished stone facade treatment and Greek or Roman ornamental details. The primary materials include honed Indiana limestone, sand mold brick in a combination of running bond and herringbone coursing pattern, recessed glass storefronts, and a wood colonial revival center doorway assembly. Architectural attributes of the Celia building's front facade are as follows. There's detailed limestone wall panels surrounding the center door with carved pilasters and capitals. There's a semicircular arch, otherwise known as a fanlight, and a distinctive keystone bisecting a dressed limestone felt course. There are two symmetrical commercial storefront entries which feature a barrel vaulted ceiling that telescope from 5 feet in diameter down to 3 feet at the entrance doors. The display windows have transoms above and patterned brick window panels below. The entrance to the storefronts are recessed single doors a few steps above the sidewalk. The elegant entryway ceilings are unique to these two storefronts. The stacked blocks of limestone that define the facade's vertical corners are called quoins. Quoins bookend the symmetrical facade and frame the storefront with its distinct classical character. There is only one other building in Swarthmore Town Center that has quoins. Lastly, a decorative herringbone brick banding is featured along at the roof cornice. The second floor level window heads display brick jack arches with limestone keystones and carved limestone windowsills. There is no other building in Swarthmore Town Center that has this distinctive herringbone brick cornice. With this detailed description, I hope you agree that this building in our borough center exudes an abundance of historical architecture character. Certainly, it's worthy of protection for our next generation. Thank you.
You're not getting copies of all of these for zeros? No. It's a copy of everything that I received this evening.
Good evening. My name is Kim O'Halloran, 300 Yale Avenue. My remarks are going to be different than what you've heard so far this evening. I am speaking tonight not as an individual citizen, but as the president of the Swarthmore Town Center Board, and I am here to speak about the impact of this application on the Town Center Business District. We want to briefly reiterate some of our previous comments on this project and update several points. Overall, the Swarthmore Town Center Board continues to support a mixed-use development that will bring additional residents, retail, and investment into the Town Center Business District. The proposed development is consistent with the STC mission of promoting our Town Center District so that people may invest, live, dine, and shop in our town. Additionally, the development supports recommendations of the Swarthmore 2030 project referenced earlier this evening, conducted by a team of residents with U3 that recommends both mixed-use development and high-end housing in town. We were very excited to hear that HOM and Gallery Park have found a new space in town, and we encourage all residents who have supported them here, in other meetings, and on social media to continue to support them with their wallets and shop in their stores. We know that any move comes with great expense, and we want to make sure they continue to have our support as customers. We are encouraged by the recent changes made by the developers in response to public feedback. We appreciate the reduction of the height in the front part of the building to be more consistent with the scale of the rest of the town. The use of materials that are more consistent with the town aesthetic, and the possibility of preserving and incorporating elements of the 102 Park Avenue facade into the design. We welcome the addition of the bollards with sight and sound notification of approaching vehicles for pedestrian sidewalk safety. In fact, we hope that Borough Council will investigate the possibility of safety measures on the alleyways in town, as some are more active with vehicular traffic than this building is projected to be. We also think it is important to speak on behalf of those who have communicated their views to us as a town center board. Most of the merchants who completed our survey and who have spoken to us have indicated that they believe their businesses may benefit greatly from this development. We have also heard from individual residents, and we receive positive feedback almost daily regarding the excitement and sense of community that downtown events have generated over the past year. These individuals shared that they want to see a more vibrant downtown and believe this proposal may add to that vibrancy. However, there are merchants and individuals who have specifically mentioned to us that they are concerned about the level of hurtfulness that has arisen in town when it comes to this proposal. As just one example, I personally received a letter as Town Center Board President accusing me of taking some sort of compensation from the developers and asking for my resignation if I didn't support a specific group of residents in the borough. To be perfectly clear, I am not being compensated by them, and I will not personally benefit in any way from this project. I am simply here to support the merchants in our town center business district where this application is being considered. As a board and as residents of this community that we all love, we are asking everyone to do their part to ensure that discussion and debate allows everyone to be heard. We can and should be able to have constructive conversations about potential change without resorting to accusatory language, and instead have constructive and respected dialogue without personal attacks. We are a community of smart, kind, and passionate people, and that's evident tonight and in every meeting that I attend. We are better than what we have shown of late. We encourage people to voice their specific concerns, since the developers have thus far been responsive and open to compromise. We encourage people to speak during public comment like this, or email Borough Council members. Sharing feedback of all types is important, as all voices deserve to be heard. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Julie Ellis. I'm at 128 Park Avenue, and I've spoken to Planning Commission before in opposition to the proposed project on behalf of my neighbors who share the 100 block of Park Avenue with me and my family. We are the near neighbors who seem to be heavily impacted by the proposed project and by the demolition. And I wondered if just for a moment my near neighbors might be willing to stand up and show who you are. Those are my kids there, my near kids. So we represent the nearest neighbors, and I've already expressed both in the Swarthmore and at this commission our feelings about the proposed projects and why we're opposed to it. I will say as a side note that I was interested to hear that the project would entail no extraordinary noise. And I'd like to get more details about that. So what I want to do today is brief. You're welcome. And I just want to read, this is a letter, and I'm only going to read 2 short paragraphs from it. So this is a letter from Paul Stanky, Executive Director of the Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia. It was a letter to Jane Billings on the proposed condo project dated January 5th, 2022, and I'll be brief. Dear Mrs. Billings, the Preservation Alliance is a member-supported nonprofit advocacy organization founded in 1996. We are dedicated to encouraging the preservation and adaptive reuse of historic buildings in the greater Philadelphia region. We recently learned of the proposed residential project at 110 Park Avenue in Swarthmore. The proposed new building would replace two structures that have stood on the site since the early 20th century. The Preservation Alliance understands that these two structures have been determined eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. Moreover, they are undeniably reflective of the traditional scale of the Swarthmore townscape. So I'll be brief. You all have this letter on record. I don't know if they have this letter, but I have copies of it here. And what I would also like to request is that the letters that have been read tonight and referenced tonight, that they be appended or amended to today's minute meetings. Is that something that's possible? Who's taking the minute meetings, by the way? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Platt, 21 Overland Avenue. I've been in town since about 85, so 37 years. I lost count how many years, so I can't do that numbers anymore. I have two brief comments to make. One of them is concerning the presentation. And this deals with the information flow going back and forth, and I was curious about that. It was a good presentation. It was a well-organized presentation, had appropriate expert witnesses. They presented a lot of interesting detail. And then during the presentation, I was saying there's no organized rebuttal to that. And that was a concern. But then I realized that right now we have a disorganized rebuttal. And I hope that the Planning Commission and future meetings will take into account that the presentation by Don and Bill and everybody was a well-organized presentation that had a lot of information in place that was very much in their favor. And the disorganized rebuttal that you're hearing is not quite as thorough, but I think it's fairly broad in scope, and I hope that we'll also treat that accordingly. Second half, I'd like to speak for the trees. And it's been a long-term concern for both myself and my wife. Part of the demolition and the ongoing demolition project involves removing a large series of trees. At the last presentation, I believe both Don and Bill said there is no plan in place right now to replace the trees. They're working on it. They're working with the borough to try to organize something. And they said trees will go up somewhere in an appropriate count to replace that. I approve of that. I hope they will be good placed. I hope they will be placed close to the environment if this project goes through. But my one request is that before this first shovel hits the ground, that a complete project plan be put into place for the long-term span of the entire project. And that includes specifics and commitments on what is going to be happening to the foliage structure and foliage and green space replacement. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Judy Farley. Since 1990, I've lived at 107 Rutgers Avenue. And from the one slide that was shown up there on the picture of the massiveness of that building, you cannot see any of our three buildings on that property. And there's a reason for that, because this will go within 3 feet of the property line through all three sides. What this does is cut out light on all three sides, not only to our buildings, to the apartment buildings on the east side, and to Con Allen Design on the west side, and it inhibits the length of the sun on all of our flat roofs on all three sides. This is a problem, especially in the winter, when we depend on the sun to melt the ice so that we can get it down off the roof so it doesn't create leaks in the buildings, and this would be for any flat roof building. So I would like to request that before any decision is made, that an independent study of shade in the winter especially be made of what the shadow of that large building is going to cast on neighbors on three sides, because it's going to rise up 5+ stories, and it's just too close Unlike the other buildings that are on South Chester Road, it is too close. They all have parking lots on at least one side. There will be no open space except the alleyway, and it is just too close. There will not be enough light and certainly enough sun in the winter. Thank you.
My name is Jennifer Baker. I live at 306 South Chester Road. I am hoping that the Planning Commission will take into account the idea of precedent, and that if you allow these buildings to be demolished, it will create a precedence for other buildings in the town center to be demolished. Because once it is okay for one building to be demolished, then the next person says, well, that was allowed, so why wouldn't this be allowed? So maybe Michael's Corner will be next, or any one of the other lovely little buildings that we have in downtown Swarthmore. I've seen that happen in other neighborhoods, and it may not seem real now, but it is. I'm also hoping that the Planning Commission represents the community, and the vast majority of this community is against this project. It is so totally out of scale. The height is absurd. We don't want every building in Swarthmore to be torn down and replaced with a 5-story building, but this will set a precedence for doing that. I think there are very few people who are in favor. I would say the 3 partners who stand to make an awful lot of money. This has not been mentioned. It is being presented as if this were a good deed for the town, but it is very destructive. And I hope that the committee will vote against the demolition. And I also hope that anyone who really on the committee, I don't know all of you, I know some of you, if you have any connection to the developers, I think you should recuse yourself. I don't know that you do. I have no knowledge of this. But I hope that you will all think about that before you vote. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Susan Wright. I live at 147 Park Avenue since 1981 and moved to the borough in 1977. I served on the 1999 Swarthmore Borough Revitalization Task Force. I was the chair of the Historic Resource Committee of the Swarthmore Planning Commission when I served on that body after the time on the task force, and I also served on the Borough Council's Historic Preservation Task Force. So I have been long connected with concerns about historic preservation and also revitalization of the town center. I'm opposed to granting this conditional use because it would not satisfy the requirements for granting conditional use under 126411, and because the demolition of 110 Park and 102, 104 Park, which I'll refer to as the buildings, are 2 buildings of significant historic value, and they would violate the zoning code 1256-06A2 because demolition would have a substantial negative effect on the character of the town center. Both buildings are defined as having historic value under section 1240.05, the definition section of the Swarthmore zoning code. Both appear on the 2001 Swarthmore Historic Resources Survey. Both were fully documented, and both were separately photographed, which did not occur with all 350 buildings that appeared in the survey, including my own home, is not one of the fully documented ones. And as such, they are appearing in the survey data, section C, and thus as stated in the survey introduction, are among the most significant sites in Swarthmore. The survey makes it absolutely clear in its introduction and methodology that is not just some thoughtlessly compiled complete list of old buildings in Swarthmore, as some have asserted, but represents only a selection of historic resources in the borough, and that many places had been left off of the survey, both intentionally and unintentionally. Words matter. Under the Pennsylvania laws of statutory interpretation, one cannot disregard the language of the statute and substitute personal opinion in its place, a la Humpty Dumpty and Through the Looking Glass. The buildings are defined in the zoning code as having historic value and characterized in the survey as having significant historic value. The borough manager has correctly determined that the buildings have historic value. Arguments that the buildings are not historic constitute a rewriting of the language of the zoning code, which is not permitted under the Pennsylvania laws of statutory interpretation, and as such are valid for any analysis under this ordinance. Arguments that the buildings are not historically significant are contrary to the survey's own characterization and to the 2002 determination that they contribute to a National Registered eligible historic district. To properly analyze whether the demolitions of the buildings would have have a substantial negative effect on the character of the town center, one must look to the defined purposes of the town center zoning code that are set forth in 1256-01. As significant buildings, the building's demolition would undermine the retention of the town center's streetscape, contrary to zoning purpose 1256-01B, and diminish the identified town center historic district. Because this matter is one of first impression under 1256-06, the precedent set by any decision to allow a conditional use demolition permit would be particularly significant. Chipping away at the edges of the historic core of the town center by obliterating the buildings and dismantling the character of the streetscape will create a dangerous precedent, allowing other developers to likewise ignore the purposes stated in 1256-01, B, C, and D, to preserve existing buildings of historic significance to the greatest extent possible, to promote the reuse of existing structures, and the construction of new structures in a manner that maintains the visual character and architectural scale of the town center, and ensuring that new buildings are sympathetic with and enhance the surrounding streetscape. And to buy other historic buildings with the plan of replacing them with their own dream developments instead of considering how they might adapt the present historic buildings to future reuse. The dangerous legal precedent created by granting this conditional use for demolition obliterates the protection that was intended to be afforded to buildings of historic value in the town center. There is nothing in the statute distinguishing the buildings from any other town center historic building, such as the Shire Building or the Michael's Corner. The legally insufficient arguments that have been advanced by the developers, one finds one of the buildings ugly, and in their opinions, the buildings do not really belong in the survey or have been merely added to a list of historically insignificant old buildings, and that they can't reuse the historic buildings to build exactly what they want to build on the property. All those arguments can just as easily be advanced by any other developer wishing to demolish any other historic building in the town center, and there is nothing to legally distinguish them. This in turn renders 1256-06A2 meaningless, which is against public policy and the Pennsylvania laws of statutory interpretation. It may well be that the goal of some is to create such a precedent and to invite developers to eliminate the historic fabric of the town center and replace it with buildings similar in scale to the one under consideration. But in that case, they should proceed by the appropriate procedure for revising the 2013 ordinance in a public process. Because there are no other provisions in the Swarthmore zoning code, in the whole code, protecting buildings of historic value or any historic resource, rendering 125606A2 meaningless, also denies Swarthmoreans the constitutional right to the preservation of the historic values of the environment under Pennsylvania's Environment Rights Amendment, providing that the people have the right to clean air, pure water, and the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment. Pennsylvania's public resources are the common property of all the people, including generations yet to come. This was ratified on May 18, 1971 by Pennsylvania voters by a 4-1 margin. And it also leaves the Swarthmore zoning code in violation of the municipal planning code requirement under section 603G2, which states that zoning ordinance shall provide for the protection of natural and historic features and resources. Doesn't say may, like most of the other provisions under that section. It says shall. The two-story buildings extend the town center along Park Avenue, maintaining the visual character and architectural scale of the town center, which is comprised of an eclectic blend of historic building styles of like character and scale. They support the finding of the 1999 task force that the residents wish to build upon the attractive and historic architecture of much of the town center. That's Objective C, 6, page 7 of the Swarthmore Center Revitalization Strategy. This strategy was unanimously adopted by Borough Council on October 15, 1999, and never repudiated, and has been the product of input gathered from over 900 residents, including 19 focus groups, plus an extensive written survey. The final recommendations adopted were ultimately chosen by the residents' vote. The basis for multiple initiatives, private and public, over the years, it is still relevant and significant, and I believe that the presenters for the developers also found it to be so. The town center zoning purposes found in 125601B, C, and D have been incorporated goal E6 of the revitalization strategy to assure that any new developments be consistent in scale and height with the existing structures and fit into the established village fabric of the town center. 110 Park in particular creates an effective transition to the residential near neighborhood, both visibly and functionally. It is set back with a green front lawn while providing valuable office space on the periphery of the town center in accordance with the best allocation of commercial space in the town center that we discussed at length while we were in the task force. A use that is completely eliminated by the replacement development. That is the only reason for the demolition. Protecting the residential areas adjacent to the town center so that efforts to revitalize the town center do not diminish the quality of life in these areas is a revitalization strategy. D on page, page 15. Ground floor space in 110 Park, closest to the town center, had also successfully been used as retail service space and could serve a similar purpose in the future if people want to extend retail down to the ground floor of that building. Arguments have been advanced that because the old co-op building and the building situate on this lot where the present co-op building stands were demolished, despite inclusions in the survey that the survey affords no protection to the buildings. It is correct, the survey provides no protection to any of the buildings listed in the survey. It is the 2013 zoning code for the town center that provides that protection. However, there's other factors. Both the old co-op and the building on the co-op's present site were demolished prior to the enactment of the 2013 ordinance, so provide no precedential value for any decision under the 2013 ordinance. Prior to the adoption under the predecessor business apartment zoning, there was no protection for historic buildings, and Michael's Corner and Shire's building could have just as easily been demolished. It is not inclusion in the survey which affords any protection to any historic building in the town center, but the enactment of the 2013 town center zoning provisions. In addition, both these, the old co-op and the building that was on the site of the new co-op, had been previously found to be non-contributing resources to the historic town center streetscape in an independent evaluation conducted by experts from the Pennsylvania Bureau of Historic Preservation on October of 2002, pursuant to the fact federal funding was involved in the process of getting the new street Lafayette extension, Lincoln Way, finalized. This evaluation, the same evaluation that established that these two buildings that were in the survey were not contributing, established the boundaries of an eligible National Register Swarthmore Business Historic District, and expressly found that 102 Park was a contributing historic resources. Such evaluations are entirely consistent with the survey, which was intended to be a working document, to be modified as new information surfaced, as it did during this 2002 expert evaluation, and more recently with the additional information about the connection of 102-104 with the immigrant history in Swarthmore. It has also been argued that the borough did not establish a historic district, which is true, and that therefore the borough had no intent to protect any historic buildings. On the contrary, the borough protects historic buildings by the provisions enacted in Section 2013 Town Center zoning, and has clearly expressed its intent to do so in the 1256-01 purpose provisions, in the 1256-06 conditional anti-demolition conditional use provision, and in the provisions in other sections of 1256, including 1256-07. Arguments stating that the criteria for assessing whether the demolition of the buildings would have a substantial negative effect on the character of the town center is some kind of determination whether the economic value of the replacement development might be greater than the economic value of the buildings, completely dismisses the purpose of zoning laws.
My question tonight is one that gets at transparency issues and good governance. And I'm wondering how and whether Planning Commission members have been instructed to disclose personal interest, asked about conflict of interest, or if there are processes in place for recusement, kind of what those issues would, how that's been dealt with. Whether that's, I can imagine that being solicitor, chair, acting chair, that'd be helpful to me.
There are no guidelines requiring recusal under the borough code or under. There are no specific provisions of the code that require recusal. It is up to each commission member to decide whether they need to recuse themselves. I assume that you are piggybacking on Ms. Manicker's earlier comments?
I'm actually not. This was just something that had been brought up months and months ago about whether personal interest would be, and I actually am, I mean, if,
I believe that at one of the prior meetings, all of the commission members did state on the record whether they had an interest in the property. I believe we did that before we voted at one of the earlier meetings.
okay, thank you.
Can I speak to that?
Please.
So,
I'm interested to hear what the solicitor has to say.
there's noise in the back when we turned over. The Pennsylvania Ethics Act governs when you do recuse. If anybody has a personal pecuniary interest in this project, they cannot participate in voting. If anybody has a member of their immediate family who has a financial interest in it, they cannot vote. Immediate family is defined as parent, child, sibling. Does not include siblings involved. So there is no recusal required under Pennsylvania law or any facts that I'm aware of.
Just a question on that. Would a donation to an organization who's opposing seeking standing, I guess, in this case?
There is not a statutory requirement to recuse in that situation. There is a basis for somebody who gets an adverse decision to bring a challenge of bias, seeking to overturn whatever the decision is. There is danger in that. It is not clear cut.
Thank you.
Lindsay Duggan, 325 Garden Path.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's Lindsay Duggan, 325 Garden Path. I'm a member of the Bike Don't Go Action Team, and many of you probably know me as the mom with the huge bike that I ride around with my two kids in. And I remember when we first came to Swarthmore and decided we wanted to live here, and we came downtown, and it was farmer every day. And there were so many families with kids walking and biking with their kids. And that is what made me decide I wanted to live here. I wanted to be part of that community. And I feel that removing these buildings, I know we're not supposed to talk about we're only supposed to talk about demolition, but we can't avoid the fact that something else is going to be there. That the influx of traffic on Park Ave will drastically take away from that cycling and walking of downtown. Anybody who spends any amount of time downtown in the middle of the day, so many cyclists, so many pedestrians. And I just don't know how those things can coexist. That's my main concern. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joan Urban. Length of time in town is relevant. I've lived here since I was 3. I've lived here about 50 years and 15 other years elsewhere.
Could you give your address, please, for the record?
20 South Princeton Avenue.
Thank you.
And it's funny, the last speaker just addressed something that I was very concerned about. In general, I echo what everyone else has said, that a 5-story building looming over the rest of the town is way out of sync with the existing scale buildings in the town center. And it will, without a doubt, become a precedent. There's no question about that. So the footage, the percentage of town, the percentage of the town center that is occupied by the lot or the footage of the building or whatever, that's a note, but even more important is the fact that you're establishing a whole new precedent, which everyone will want to keep up with. They say we're too small, look, we look silly next to this big building, and of course there'll be profit concerns. I mean, I feel like we are here in the public interest. What I do in terms of volunteer work, what my family has always done, has been driven by the public interest, not by, there was no profit involved, no personal gain. And so if it is necessary for the public interest to scale the building down to 3 or 4 stories, that should be what's done. This is not about making money for anybody. It is about, to me, the comments that have been made earlier about community values and then the issue about safety with the traffic and so on are what's at stake here. There are different aspects to this. There's a question of affordability. I mean, most of us are not going to be able to afford a condo in that building. And I think that's a loss. I think that it's unusual what Swarthmore has. And I see no reason why we should be going to let go of this. The opportunity to walk and stroll down the sidewalks, to have casual conversations, as Bob Small said, I mean, those are crucial. I mean, there's building relationships for adults and children. There's exchange of information. I think that's absolutely the opportunity. My mother used to say, oh, well, it's great that her mother could live in the dark apartments. She formed relationships with people in the co-op. And how much did that save in therapy bills? A lot. But I think all those things are crucial to our development as persons, to our relationships, and to our the knowledge base that we bring to make decisions in the world, generally to the quality and integrity of our lives. Somebody's looking very bored. I think those are important. I mean, they're the most important some of the most important things we can have here. I am really concerned. I've been sitting here, and that's why I didn't have time to talk. My mind is, I've got so much stuff going on. But I keep thinking of something that happened when I was in high school here, which is that, I mean, and I'm thinking of the context of this building, proposed building in Middletown with 5 stories. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of traffic. You have I guess traffic to the Borough Council, to the Borough Hall has been diminished during COVID, but you have contractors going in and out all the time, you have people going to the library, you have kids going to the library. You have a lot of people going to the community center in the Methodist Church. You have senior citizens who meet here. You have the ballet where kids go. I mean, it's a pretty intense concern there. They do a lot of practices. They have their performances. It's a big thing there. And you have diagonal parking all up and down the street. Take it out Farmers Market Day. Oh my gosh, you can't park anywhere there. There's a lot of people going through and a lot of people trying to walk and have interactions. And kids just living and being kids. So with all the parking and traffic, you have a problem that, and then you have a condo 5 stories. This is just so out of sync. I really foresee a real risk of accidents. And so one thing I asked about the traffic study, it's already conducted, is it?
I understand it has already been conducted.
Well, I'm wondering if they looked at not only the number of people and the number of cars, but the number of kids who will be walking in. I mean, I have always known that one of the worst places for car accidents is where there's parking lots or diagonal parking. It's just the worst. You know, people coming out, little kids, you can't see them over the cars. The kids are smaller than a lot of the cars. Or if they're a little taller, not much. I really worry about accidents. And the thing that I was thinking about was in high school, when no one thought there'd be an accident between the high school and the middle school and the Providence. At that point, it was not merged. I think it might have been the first year of the administrations being merged, or maybe it was the year before that. Whatever, it was right around that time when students came out after basketball game. It's a different situation than here. There's a little bit of a slope there, and it's a state highway, so cars can go faster. But here you have all this diagonal parking, whatever you call it, and kids of all ages walking afternoons, on Saturdays, everything. You have kids coming out between those cars all the time. So at the time of the accident, as I recall, someone can check this, but 8 high school students were killed. No one thought beforehand that would be a problem, putting the high school and the middle school across from each other. And now they have the metal frame archway.
walkway. It didn't occur to anyone, and no one thought there was a realistic safety threat there. And so I wonder if the traffic study is looking at numbers of children that are going to be crossing the street, considering all the activities that go on there. And I also wonder if they've thought about what's going to happen, because I know, I raised a kid here, and I know parents here. They're going to look at all the traffic there, which will be there, and they will say, I cannot let my child go to the public library. I cannot let them go to the ballet. I will have to drive them every time. And you're going to have all these cars, and there will still be some kids. And in fact, there was a kid, another story on Dartmouth Avenue, a young child who came out between two cars. This was in the block of Dartmouth Avenue between Oberlin and South Princeton. He came out, he was 5 or 6, came out between two cars, and he was seriously injured. They didn't think he would come back, or he thought he had serious brain damage, and he actually did okay. But it's just a perfect place for that kind of accident. And so I think the traffic study probably did not consider what will happen, which is that parents will be driving their kids to these events more than they are now. And that will be more traffic. And so I would ask the traffic study look at that, and that you explicitly address that when you discuss the traffic study. So other than that, I'm sure that everyone has good intentions, they mean the best, but I really think that 5 stories is an assault on our community values.
Thank you.
Hi, Martha Perkins, 422 Park Avenue. And as you stated, you received the Heritage Commission Delaware County letter that was addressed to Borough Council.
That's correct.
But I'm here to read it tonight. Dear Swarthmore Borough Council, the Heritage Commission of Delaware County was established to oversee the rich heritage of Delaware County and advise on projects regarding historic areas and buildings. It has come to our attention that there is a proposed development project that is requesting permission to demolish 2 buildings on Park Avenue within the commercial district. 102-104 Park Avenue was built by 1925 and extended to the front of its current appearance by 1942. It is a fine example of early 20th century colonial revival architecture. 110-112 Park Avenue was constructed circa 1917 and has a unique fascia and cornice. These both positively contribute to the character of the borough and business district. The Heritage Commission wants to voice our concern that the proposed changes could adversely impact the overall character of the area. The Swarthmore Business District was determined to be eligible for National Register of Historic Places in 2006. The business district has for more than 100 years reflected changing architectural styles, but the scale of the buildings has been in keeping with the residential area that surround it and Swarthmore College. All new development should be compatible with the character of the area. The buildings identified as historic resources in the borough should be protected from demolition due to their architectural and historical significance. We strongly urge the Swarthmore Planning Commission to not allow the current development plan to be approved. And it's signed respectfully, Barbara Marinelli, Chairman of the Heritage Commission of Delaware County. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, Allison Manford. I was so head up about a certain issue that I didn't say the main thrust of what I wanted to say, which is, I grew up in a small town outside of Rochester called Pittsford, New York. It is a historical town. I spent my entire childhood there. They had parades just like the July 4th parade here. And that's what I longed for when I looked for a place to live with my family. It had a historical district of 19th century to early 20th century buildings, not dissimilar to Swarthmore. We moved here for that reason. My hometown has been able to reuse all those historical buildings to great effect. If they lost those buildings, people would not move there. People would move to Swarthmore because of its character. And that is exactly why we came here. And it would be a lesser place if you took away those historical buildings. Thank you.
Any further public comment? discuss in light of the applicant's presentation and public comment. Again, this is conditional use for demolition permit under 1256.06. There has been reference made to the historical value of the building and its entry in the Historical Resources Survey. Under 1256.06A2, demolition of the buildings will not, there must be a determination made that the demolition of the buildings will not have a substantial negative impact on the character of the town center. Mr. Petroza, I have just one more question for you before the commission confers. Would you agree that the applicant for a conditional use permit carries the burden of demonstrating that the permits would be granted?
I'm not sure I would in this context. Generally, and there are certain types of criteria, standards and criteria, that an applicant has to go through. There are other types that protestants have to go through. There are certain standards and criteria that can be, the ordinance can shift the burden, and this ordinance doesn't do that. It doesn't really say who has the burden of approving these things. I believe that the issue of the alleged impact on the character is a general standard as opposed to a specific objective standard. And therefore, I'm not sure the applicant does have the burden of establishing it. I think that the protestants may have the burden, but it's, there's case law that says character is a general standard. It's not a specific objective standard. I mean, you're hearing a lot about the building, which, our position is that's not at all relevant, but the standards that we're required to meet are objective standards. There's a big difference between objective and subjective generalized standards.
There is. Okay, so thank you for establishing your record on that. All right. Anyone would like to start the discussion? Rex, please.
There's hardly a thing I can say that hasn't been said, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. And I'd like to start with the obvious. Swarthmore is an historic town from the creation of a Quaker college in the mid-1800s in open farmlands to the running of the railroad line and development of grand estates and the town center, and gradually infilling to where we are today. Our history is manifested in large part by our historic buildings. Turning to the task of the board today, and again, this has been commented on at length, but we're looking at section 1264.11 concerning applications for conditional uses. The approval of a conditional use application shall be based on the following standards. And the first one reads, the conditional use is consistent with the Borough Comprehensive Plan and the spirit, purpose, intent, and provisions of the zoning code. So what is the intent of the zoning code? Well, it's stated quite clearly in the Town Center Zoning District, section 1256.01, the purpose of the zoning district. It delineates 7 different purposes. The second one, which unfortunately was not mentioned by any of the developers' consultants, reads, the intent of the Town Center Zoning District is to encourage the retention of the Town Center streetscape by preserving the existing buildings of historic significance to the greatest extent possible. Now, why is there a mention of historic preservation throughout the zoning code, not just in the town center zoning district, but also in the subdivision and land development code? One important reason is decades of work by our residents in quantifying, surveying, and advancing the importance of historic preservation in our town. Another purpose I would submit is the borough's stewardship of historic preservation, which is codified in an amendment to the Pennsylvania Constitution, and it's been mentioned by Susan Wright and others. We call it the Environmental Rights Amendment, which reads, "The people have a right," and I'm going to read only the pertinent parts because we've all been here a long time. "The people have a right to the preservation of historic values of the environment. As trustees of these resources, the Commonwealth shall conserve and maintain them for the benefit of all the people." Now, the Pennsylvania courts repeatedly have stated that this amendment applies to historic buildings. And the court has also said on many occasions that municipalities are acting well within their rights to preserve historic buildings. Turning to the application before us, the application asks for the demolition of not one but two historic buildings. There are a number of historic buildings on the survey in the town center. Not all of them of equal value, I would submit, but these two particular buildings, and it has been described in letters from many preservation organizations, and that they have exquisite and unique architectural features, unlike many of the other buildings in the town center. That, and also the fact that they exist in the town center, which attracts visitors from outside the borough who appreciate the beauty and the historical nature of our buildings and the walkability and the commercial aspects. And for that particular reason, I believe that these two buildings specifically deserve the protection that the borough is required to provide for the citizens of this community.
I just have some questions. So how does Pennsylvania define historic building?
Are you asking me?
Yes. Well, I'm asking you.
I'm not here as an attorney, although I am an attorney. I'm here as a board member sharing my concerns.
So
if you have a legal question, perhaps you should ask the town solicitor.
Is there a definition in PA code for historic building?
Well, it depends on the context. I mean, but for tonight's context, there is a borough ordinance.
But not in Pennsylvania, because that's a Pennsylvania. Microphone. We were talking about a Pennsylvania ordinance from 1999, right? And it talks about historic buildings in Pennsylvania, historic resources in Pennsylvania, public right, which I understand that. But what is a historic building? What does that refer to? Because it's a broad term.
Well, it is, but this ordinance is grounded on things that were designated a resource.
Correct. I'm not talking about the.
Okay. But you're
I'm just interested in that particular.
in this constitutional provision, and I don't have an answer to that. I don't know.
So does it refer directly to maybe like federal references?
I'm not going to be helpful in telling you how that Pennsylvania constitutional provision is
travel with. Because I don't know that historic is defined in some places. The federal government defines historic buildings as buildings that contributed to an important historical movement or action or event, or that a historic personage is attached to for some reason. So in Swarthmore, some historic buildings under federal rules would be the Ogden Building, which is up on Swarthmore Avenue, up by it's an original colonial building from 1740 or something like that, 1780. The oldest building in town, Benjamin, and because it's from the colonial period, it's a historic building. Benjamin West Building is a little bit newer, but it is almost equally old, and it had an important person living in it, an important artist for his life. So it's considered to be important, a historic building. To the best of my knowledge, in close proximity to the town center, there's one other building that's considered historic, and that's actually the Swarthmore Apartment Building, which is a 5-story apartment building just the road, a couple of hundred feet away from that project site. So I rolled my eyes at that too, actually. When I read that, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And all this is in the historic survey. So Swarthmore is full of historic, of old buildings. I would absolutely say it's full of buildings. They primarily date from roughly 1900 to 1940. The vast majority of buildings. There was a little spurt in the 50s and the 60s. But most of those older, historic, interesting buildings aren't in town center, and I think the historic survey also mentions that. It does. So I don't know. These two buildings are, at least are there. They're old. They're both 20th century buildings, so they're not old like historic old. There are no historic events that are tied to them.
May I speak to this one?
Sure.
Is this working?
Yes.
My name is Doug Harnsberg. I'm an architect who spent my career working on historic districts, primarily in that other Commonwealth of Virginia. But I have experience in this subject. I have been the author of 6 historic districts, so I know what that constitutes. I take issue with the characterization that these buildings don't meet some standard of historic quality. The key issue here is not individual designation. That is a special criteria on the National Register. When you have a building of particular significance, all the famous houses of great stature and presence, those are individually designated districts. Here we have a historic district. It's a sum of the parts. I think Chris made that reference in his presentation. An historic district is an assembly of buildings that constitutes value of the history within the community. And determinations are made within that designation of a district whether a building is or is not a contributing historic resource. The map that was developed and that was spoken about earlier in the presentation clearly designates those buildings as either contributing or not. This is not a question to be debated. The buildings were designated as contributing historic resources, significant to be registered as a National Register district. Now, the Commonwealth of the Swarthmore Borough decided not to pursue that designation in 2006, and we're here to discuss and debate that today. But there's no question that the State Preservation Office made that determination that there's an eligible historic district, and these buildings are eligible to contribute to that. And that's precisely the language that's in the code of our town center zoning. So, I would just say that I have a lot of experience with the National Register of Historic Places. I've argued back and forth about contributing and non-contributing, but there's really no question, and there shouldn't be any question in this audience or at this commission, that these two buildings have been designated and acknowledged by the State Preservation Office as being contributed. That's a given.
But that
let me finish,
I agree
please.
with you 100%. But to complete my thought, that very reason, that statement that they are historic is why we are here.
True.
And our code says that these historic buildings, before you can tear them down, they have to be considered, it says, the planning commission has to consider their historic value. And that discussion in itself implies that they can be torn down.
I would agree with you about that.
And that's what we're doing right now.
Okay.
So cutting off discussion about tearing them down by saying that they're historic is not about.
No, I wasn't cutting that down. I was acknowledging and signifying that your statement that these buildings are potentially non-significant or historic, they have been designated historic and eligible for it. The documents speak for themselves. They document speak for themselves. And the
that document that we've all been talking about.
The state actually had suggested doing local
I appreciate it. We've heard from the applicant. This is the board discussion. Thank you.
Let me just conclude by saying that obviously, as a preservation architect, I invested in historic properties, and that's why I chose to serve on the Planning Commission. It's important, and I do sense that we are at a fulcrum in this decision. I do want to emphasize that Jennifer Baker's comment that there's a precedent to be set here, not just about this project and these two buildings, but really the entire village of Swarthmore is at risk for a continuation of this precedent made tonight. So I want to stress that this is more than just the significance of these two buildings. It's really about the character of the village and what that scale will be. And I noted in an earlier discussion about the zoning code, a comment was made about dimensional standards. Dimensional standards, as of the 2013 zoning code changes, means any developer is capable of submitting an application and asking for a 65-foot building to replace any of the village buildings that exist. This is not a unique moment. And the concern that I have tonight is that if we set a precedent in this direction, that it may have a profound effect far beyond the impact of this particular project. And that's the concern that I think needs to be considered.
David, did you? Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, the intent when we did this in 2013 was to create higher density in town center. This was intentional. Town center, if we look at it, does not have terribly good architecture. And a parking lot in the center for a borough building that is marginal in terms of aesthetics. So there were reasons why we drew those lines where we drew those lines. Being a commuter city outside Philadelphia, I think it's kind of urban design 101. Increased density to invigorate your town center. Now, whether you agree with that or not, That's what we do. Dimensionally, in terms of massing. Now, we can revisit that, and I suspect we will, but that's what we came up with. And there were a fairly large number of talented people that did this for many years.
One brief comment about historic buildings, what is or what is not. We know, in the context of this application, we know what historic buildings of value are. The demolition provision 1256.06 states specifically, in order for a building of historic value, as defined in the Borough of Swarthmore zoning code, and it goes on, we look at the historic value definition, plainly states historic resources identified in the most updated version of the Borough of Swarthmore Historic Resources Survey. These two buildings are in that survey. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's undisputed.
Nancy?
I just have a question for the applicant. In your presentation, you said that you looked at preserving the buildings, existing buildings, or facades, and incorporating them into the design of the development. And your answer why you didn't do it was because it was too hard. I think you also said that you couldn't do it because it wouldn't meet the zoning. Can you explain that?
Yes, clearly, I was referring to 102. 110 doesn't meet the code. It's sort of a myriad of ways. It's not on the street. It has no opening.
Existing building will not have to.
Okay. Well, in any case, I was really focusing on 102. We didn't even contemplate the reuse of 110. We didn't anticipate that would be a positive thing for meeting some of the other goals of increasing retail, extending the town center, etc., widening the sidewalk, making the some of the other goals of the ordinance. We did look at 102, and because we really did think it would be terrific if we could say that it just wasn't practical. Not impossible, but it wasn't practical.
I think I'm not opposed to development and density in the town center. If you want affordable housing, I know this isn't an affordable project, but if you, moving forward, if you want affordable housing, you have to build. And the only place to build high density is in the town center. That being said, I still think that you should make an effort because you're asking to demolish not one, in a small area, 2 historic buildings. So you need to, I think you need to go back to the drawing board and make an effort to try to save it.
Just what we touched on earlier is we understand, in our opinion, we get that it's subjective and people have different opinions. The facade of 102, we understand, is important. When we looked at the functionality of the building, the facade is a very small portion of that building. We looked at, can we preserve the facade in place? And ultimately said that a better solution, we felt, would be to try to make nods to it, reconstruct pieces of it, so that we can transform the use of the building to more conform with the goals of the town center zoning district while still preserving it. So that's why I get that might feel like a nod rather than a full swing effort, but the idea was, can we preserve the character and still create the new space that achieves the other goals of the zone? That's.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I would say doing anything, can you guys hear me? Doing anything to sort of preserve the facade and not the rest of the building would just be false. I think that's, I would say that's probably a non-starter. I think the question of reusing the building is a good one, but I certainly, as an architect, can understand understand some of the challenges, especially given, you know, it was built at a specific period of time, with a specific use in mind, especially for the ground floor. There's two storefronts that are bifurcated by the stair, and the upper residential units. I'm not entirely familiar with their layouts, but it's quite a big building. Much of the facade is on the side, on the property line, sort of conditions. So, you know, in terms of utilizing those spaces and really getting natural light into those spaces with an enlarged project, I can sort of sense the challenge in that. So I can appreciate that. I did just want to touch on a couple of points, and you know, first, I have to acknowledge that both of these buildings are definitely historic. I don't need a definition of historic to tell me that these buildings are historic in nature, and they do contribute to the historic character of the town. The question is a question of degree, and I think just coming back to Doug's point about really evaluating this in the context of a historic district, and not just one-off sort of object buildings and their individual value as historic objects, but really how they contribute in the overall context of the historic district. And in this case, I would suggest that these buildings are a little bit more removed, a little bit more removed. Now, they're at an important point and sort of juncture within the town. They are sort of at the start of the town center as you approach town, coming from the west, I guess from the east on Park Avenue. But I see these as a little bit more in a sort of non-continuous, disparate fabric of this portion of Park Avenue. So to say that they would significantly detract from the character, the historic character of the downtown, I would question that. I'm interested in hearing what my fellow commissioners do say, but in particular, the Celia building has many interesting things. I think those were pointed out in terms of material and detailing. But it's a modest building. It stands on its own, and I'm not sold that it would represent a significant detraction from the historic character of the town center. And furthermore, someone had mentioned the space where the farmers market takes place, and sort of the sense of center to this town. And I just wanted to touch on this because I think, you know, while yes, we're supposed to be talking about the demolition, yes, we need to talk about what really is, what is the outcome of this. And for me, there is a strong potential opportunity in redefining what this edge is to this town and to this open space, which very much does serve the center of town, this open space that's defined by Park Avenue, by Dartmouth, and Borough Hall. I think that's if you point on a map where the center of town is, that is really where it is. Today it's a parking lot. Maybe it won't always be a parking lot, but an opportunity to redefine what that edge is on Park Avenue, that edge which faces the center of town, the central open space. I think there's something there, and I think to preclude the ability to extend the continuity of downtown, of street frontages, of active ground floor frontages, in perpetuity based on these two buildings, I think that would be frankly misguided. That's my point of view.
Thank you, John. So I believe that, I'm going to differ with Mr. Petroza. I believe that the applicant bears the burden of demonstrating in this case that demolition of these buildings will not have a substantial negative impact on the town center. That is a heavy burden in my mind. we're considering the conditional use of the property as a proposed high-rise condo building. There are many valid concerns that have been raised throughout this process. This is either the third or fourth substantive planning commission meeting on this project. Concerns have been raised about traffic, light, shade, streetscape, the scale of the building against the rest of the town center, many other issues as well. I believe that the analysis that we are tasked with undertaking is a subjective analysis. Members of this commission are tasked with using their judgment to make a determination about what a substantial negative impact is and whether one is present in this case. I join Nancy in that I support increased density. I support development in the town center. Based on my read of the standards under 1264.11, I have serious concerns about whether this conditional use meets those standards. The Borough Comprehensive Plan that is in place is currently the 2006 Multi-Municipal Comprehensive Plan. That plan is rather extensive. It provides for some specific recommendations, including maintaining a mix of rental housing in terms of price, size, and availability. I had spoken at a previous meeting about concerns about affordable housing with this project. Section 1256.01B of the zoning code encourages the preservation of existing buildings of historic significance to the greatest extent possible. Additionally, section 1256.01C expresses an intent of the code as to promote the construction of new structures in a manner that maintains the visual character and architectural scale of the town center. I note that those are words that were omitted from the recitation of section 1256.01C earlier this evening by Professor Dewey. Section 1256.01F of the code expresses the intent to retain and enhance the diverse array of retail, residential, commercial, and civic uses in the town center. The proposed conditional use is a high-rise condominium building with required construction of multiple buildings of historic value as defined in the zoning code. I understand that there are a variety of opinions about whether the historical resources survey means that a building is historic or has value. I don't think that that necessarily matters for purposes of this analysis. The code expressly states that for buildings that are identified in that survey, we have to undertake this analysis, and that is what this commission is doing tonight. My personal view, I believe that there's also a substantial disconnect between the existing area and the properties and proposed development, including the character and type of development. The lack of affordable rental housing, actually any rental housing in this proposed property, is of particular concern, especially in this age of rapidly spiraling housing prices and increasing rents. The loss of affordable housing options in the heart of our town center, across from our public library and Borough Hall, no less, is a serious consideration for me in this process, particularly in light of the applicant's prior on-the-record and out-of-hand rejection of the possible inclusion of affordable housing in this project. I don't recall at which meeting that was. We can look up the minutes to find it if we need to. Aside from the applicant and those consultants speaking on its behalf and its principals, this project has seen no support tonight from members of the public present. That is consistent with prior commission meetings at which this project was discussed. I believe there was one meeting where it was a 12-to-1 ratio, or 24 against 2 in favor. I cannot conclude that there will not be a substantial negative impact on the character of the town center. As far as I am concerned, the applicant has not met its burden tonight. That is my view. The Planning Commission is tasked with making a recommendation to Borough Council whether to endorse this conditional use of demolition. If no one else on the commission has any comments, I will entertain a motion I'll put it this way. Let's see what this draws. I'll entertain a motion for discussion to recommend that Borough Council approve conditional use and demolition permit pending final adjudication, including exhausting the process of any appeal of the zoning permit. Is there a motion to recommend open it up for discussion? Motion to recommend that Borough Council approve the conditional use and demolition permit pending final adjudication of the zoning permit. That would include the exhaustion of any appeals, including the currently pending appeal that was filed by City of Swarthmore. Is that clear? Is there a motion? Okay. I'm asking if anyone wants to move to recommend to Borough Council that we approve, that we recommend that Borough Council approve the conditional use and demolition. Does anyone want to make that motion?
Yeah, I'll make that.
Is there a second? Motion fails for want of a second. Is there a motion to recommend that Borough Council deny any conditional use or demolition permit? There's a motion. Is there a second? Second by Rex. Is there any further discussion? All right. There's a motion and a second to recommend that Borough Council deny conditional use and demolition permit on the application submitted by the applicant. Let's do a roll call vote. This is to recommend that Borough Council deny.
Chris Bruin, that's me, I'm opposed. No. David Virgil. Nancy Templeton.
I'm in favor.
Don Jones.
I'm in favor.
Rex Bryan. Doug Hesberger, sorry.
Arnsberger.
Close enough. I'm in favor. John McAllen. Opposed. And James.
I vote yes. So the vote was 5-3. Planning Commission will be recommending the Borough Council deny the conditional use. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. There's a motion and a second. Without opposition, motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.